There are whispers older than language, older than song, murmurs that drift through the hollow corridors of the world, soft as breath on stone. In the deep beneath, far below the roots of the mountains, and deeper still than any mine has reached since, there once dwelled a people, unlike any that walk Nirn today. In ancient days, they were called the Dwemer, deep elves, though they named themselves in tones and truths that no living throat could speak now. The silence they left behind is not empty. It is heavy. It waits. In a time before the breaking of Resdain, and long before the tribunal would rise, the Dwemer lived beneath the earth as lords of brass and echo. Their cities were vast machines, citadels woven into the bones of the world. They did not build in reverence, nor did they build to honor sky or star. Their constructions were proofs, statements in metal, equations etched into existence itself. It is said that in those dim ages, the world above burned with the wars of elves and men, gods and Daedra, while beneath, in the endless dark, the Dwemer forged a kingdom untouched by chaos. They did not pray. They did not kneel. The stars to them were not signs but symbols, waiting to be read, decoded, bent. And though the world above changed with every age, the world below remained still, humming with purpose. The oldest stones in Tamriel do not speak with words. They remember through pressure and time, and some of those stones deep beneath Vardenfell and Skyrim still carry the memory of the Dwemer's touch. Their structures are not ruins in the common sense, for they have not collapsed, they endure. Brass pipes still exhale long cooled breath. Locked doors still guard chambers, never entered by those who came after. There is a kind of sacred sleep upon these places, undisturbed and dreaming. No one alive recalls the moment of their vanishing. Not truly. Chronicles written in the centuries that followed speak of a war atop Red Mountain, of betrayals and broken pacts, of gods meddling in mortal fates. Some claim the Dwemer sought to use the heart of Lorkhan itself, the divine remnant torn from the god of change and buried like a wound in the mountain's heart. According to recovered inscriptions and the heretical codices hidden in the vaults of the dissident priests, the heart was not sacred to the Dwemer. It was useful, a source of endless power, a key to a locked door no other race dared to find. But we must go further back, before the brass god stirred, before Khagranach lifted hammer to stone. There was a time when the Dwemer were many, and their holds shone with steam-lit brilliance beneath Nirn's crust. Cities like Buthuand, Nukuliftingth, and Arkthand stood not only as fortresses but as centres of research, learning and tonal experimentation. To the Deep Elves, sound was not simply vibration, it was reality itself. Their scholars believed that through the manipulation of tonal frequencies, the nature of being could be altered, walls could be unravelled, souls could be shifted, gods could be silenced. Among them were tonal architects, masters of a science that no longer exists. They did not cast spells as mages do, nor did they use the thorn like the ancient Nords. Their craft was different, more refined, more precise. They used tuning forks longer than spears and hammers that struck resonance into stone. Every artifact they built was tuned, not just formed. Every automaton they crafted bore the echo of some deeper music, a harmony that tied the machine not only to the world, but perhaps to the soul itself. It was not worship that drove them, but will. And it is here, in this divergence, that the silence begins. The Altmer trace their lineage to the gods, bending knee to Ariel and his kin. The Dunmer, once Chimer, turned their devotion toward the tribunal. Even men have their pantheons, their 9 or 8, depending on the wind. But the Dwemer saw no god above them. Not even the Aedra could claim authority in their halls. What others called divine, they called design. What others revered, they studied. It is said that even when the Daedra came to tempt or taunt, the Dwemer listened with instruments rather than ears. They took no pleasure in pacts. They offered no sacrifices. They tested, measured, recorded. To them the Daedra were anomalies, useful, dangerous, but never holy. Some say this arrogance was their doom. Others say it was freedom. From the depths of Nutchadak, there rises a tale, half song, half etching, of a Dwemer known only as Mahul-Ka, whose eyes were replaced with glass spheres that reflected only stars. She walked among living machines and recorded the dreams of forgotten Aedra. In her final inscriptions she wrote, "The soul is not a gift, it is a frequency. All we are is what we sound." Her words were scratched onto a wall no hand has touched in thousands of years, found beneath layers of ash and stone. The inscription ends not with a conclusion, but with a line drawn into nothing, an unfinished tone. Even their language reflected this mystery. Dwemer was never truly translated, for its meaning shifts with pitch and silence. A single symbol might imply power or sorrow, depending on the breath between strokes. To read Dwemer aloud is to risk summoning what cannot be dismissed, and so most of it remains unread. What remains are remnants. Echoes. Brass limbs fused to stone. Machines that patrol halls with no masters. Lights that never dim. Locks that open to no known key. Scholars who devote lifetimes to single valves, single glyphs, and emerge no wiser than when they began. The Dwemer did not leave behind instructions. They left behind puzzles, locked gates without keys, sentences without verbs, doors that open only in dreams, and always, beneath it all, the sense that they are not truly gone, that the humming of a gear far below the soil is not the memory of motion, but motion itself. Some believe they walk still, unseen and perfect, in a world folded over ours. Others believe they achieved a unity so pure they ceased to be individual, or even material, that they became concept, or music, or time. But these are only the beginnings of the silence. And silence, in this story, is never empty. It waits, in the patient darkness beneath the lands of Tamriel, where time forgets to pass and stone forgets to crumble. The Dwemer shaped a world no sun ever saw. They did not dig merely to mine, nor build merely to dwell. They descended, purposefully, ritualistically, downward, always downward, as if seeking something buried not in the earth, but in silence itself. They believed, some say, that the deeper one goes, the closer one comes to the true fabric of the world. Their cities, now silent, were once symphonies of brass and steam, each pipe a vein, each piston a breath. Walkways spiraled like thought, rising and curling above forges that hissed with tonal resonance. The air shimmered with magica and motion. In places where other races might have placed altars, the Dwemer placed engines. Where one might expect prayer, there was only the quiet clicking of gear and measure. In these sanctums of industry, the deep elves refined more than metal. They refined themselves. Not in spirit, but in form, in function, in thought. Some claim they were not merely mortal, but aspiring toward a state beyond mortality, not through death but through deletion, a kind of sacred subtraction, to become less body, less soul, and more equation, more constant, more enduring. And at the heart of this transformation stood the new medium. Its name, even now, stirs echoes in the halls of the arcane, a golem vast beyond measure, wrought in brass and prophecy, powered by dreams of control. But before the new medium was body, it was idea, a symbol of Dwemeric truth, that divinity could be built, that permanence could be assembled, that time itself might be broken and reformed, as one reforges a blade. High Engineer Kagranak was its architect, a name shrouded in the smoke of forgotten sources. His face lost to time, but his intention carved into myth. He sought not merely to harness the heart of Lorkhan, but to apply it, to channel its divine spark into a system, an architecture of godhood, forged not from worship, but from will. He believed that what others called fate could be outplayed by design, that the soul could be unfurled like a map, its edges redrawn by those who understood the lines. Some whispered even then that the Dwemer's understanding exceeded their wisdom. Yet others say it was not hubris, but inevitability, that any race so deeply entwined with time and metal must someday attempt to rewrite the song of their being. Kagranak merely accelerated what lay already in the bones of his people, the desire to master not the world, but the structure behind it. The Numidium, when it finally stood, was not awake, not yet. Its heart was not beating, though it was present, imminent. Kagranak's tools, the keening, the sunder, the wraithguard, were not weapons, but instruments. With them he tuned the divine residue of Lorkhan, shaping it not into glory, but into code. Here, myth and memory diverge. Some say the moment Kagranak struck the heart with keening, the Dwemer were unmade in a single, shuddering breath, that they vanished not in death but in transformation, lifted from the confines of matter and dispersed into a state beyond comprehension. Others suggest a failure, a shattering of harmony so profound that it unraveled their very existence, as if the frequency that bound them to reality had been severed. Still others believe they were taken, not by Daedra, nor by gods, but by the thing they tried to become. But the truth is deeper than truth, for the world did not shatter when they vanished. The mountains did not tremble. The stars did not blink. It was as if they had never been. Their holes remained, unclaimed. Their machines continued their endless patrols, heedless of their absent makers. And the heart, still pulsing beneath Red Mountain, endured. Those who found the ruins later, the Chimera, the Nords, the Stasis, the machines did not rust, the air did not stale. It was as if time had passed by the ruins without touching them, as one might pass by a dream without waking it. Scholars wrote of the stillness, of the strange lights that never dimmed, of the gears that turned without power, and always the sense of presence, that something remained, watching, waiting, measuring. Within the deepest chambers, there are symbols etched into brass spirals and runes and tones that no living scholar has deciphered. Some suggest they are warnings, others maps, but to whom they were written remains unknown, perhaps to us, perhaps to themselves. Or perhaps they were never written to be read, but simply to remain. The legacy of the Dwemer, then, is not in memory, but in mystery. They left behind no statues, no songs, no mourning stones, no funerary rites, or ancestral shrines. Their disappearance bears no grief, only wonder, and the ruins, still humming with unknowable purpose, resist interpretation. They are machines without masters, systems without scripts. Yet in a strange way, they are not empty. Many who have walked those silent corridors speak of a feeling, not fear exactly, but reverence, a weight in the air, as though stepping into the echo of a vanished god. The sense that what was done there still ripples outward, unseen, that beneath the motionless gears and lifeless constructs lies something not dead, but dormant. Perhaps it is the Dwemer themselves, in some form unbounded by flesh or time. Perhaps it is the Numidium, dreaming its slow dream beneath the skein of reality. Or perhaps it is only memory, trapped in brass, repeating itself without release. The tribunal never spoke of them. The Empire did not dare to claim their legacy. Even the Aedra remained silent. It is a silence so complete, so exacting, it becomes its own kind of speech. And in that silence a truth lingers. Half buried, half breathed. They did not vanish. They became something else. And the world has not yet understood what that something is. The pipes still breathe, the lights still burn, the silence still listens. Beneath the crust of Tamriel, deeper than the reach of spade or spell, lie the dreaming bones of Dwemer civilization. Cities wrapped in brass, lined in forgotten logic, humming with secrets no longer spoken. Each structure remains like the shell of a mind long since departed, and yet within the cold metal and seamless stone, a strange warmth lingers. A memory not of life, but of intention. Among the ruins, the most enduring symbol is not the machine, but the door. Massive, intricate, unyielding, every stronghold of the Dwemer is guarded by doors that seem more like statements than barriers. Spun from alloys whose formulas are lost, bound by mechanisms that respond not to strength but to thought. Doors that require not keys, but harmonies, tones, precision. They do not open for those who knock, only for those who understand. To the Dwemer, the act of entry was sacred, not in the religious sense, but in the architectural one. To cross a threshold was to be measured, tuned, allowed. They did not believe in openness as others did. Their cities folded inward, spiraled toward knowledge, each level deeper, each chamber closer to something final. And so many doors remain unopened still. Even now, ages later, when mages and historians press against them with spell and device, they do not yield, not because they are broken, but because they are perfectly intact. Still listening for a song no one remembers how to sing. Some believe that these unopened spaces are vaults, holding Dwemer artifacts of terrible power. Others believe they are tombs, resting places of minds unmoored from flesh. But there are those who suggest something stranger still, that the sealed chambers are not rooms at all, but states, realities woven from tonal architecture, places that cannot be entered because they do not exist in full within this world. The word tonal appears again and again in recovered fragments, etched into control rods, scripted into murals, whispered by constructs who do not know why they speak. Tonal architecture, tonal manipulation, tonal harmonics, sound as structure, vibration as reality. To the Dwemer, sound was not fleeting, it was foundation. They believed that all things, stone, thought, soul, could be reduced to a set of tones, not in metaphor, but in literal truth. Each being, each object, existed as a pattern within a larger harmonic field. By learning the frequencies, One could change the thing. A mountain might be softened into sand, a soul might be lifted from a body, reconfigured, reassigned. They did not fear this possibility. They pursued it, and so it was that their tools resembled instruments more than weapons. Resonators, strikers, tuning rods, great hammers that struck reality itself. When they walked their halls, they did so with calculated purpose, each footfall a part of a sequence, a step within a pattern. Their lives were not ritual, but resonance. The few surviving devices we possess, those that haven't locked themselves away in self-defense, speak to this truth. Machines that recognize tonal input, crystals that respond to song, locks that hum when approached, as if waiting for a forgotten note. The most famed of these devices remains the tonal lock of Bathadam's, an immense door with no handle, no hinge, and no seam. It emits a soft sound, barely audible, a tone that fluctuates with the presence of the observer. It is said that one scholar spent 4 decades beneath its arch, attempting to match the tone with voice, with flute, with spell. He died at its threshold. The door remains unopened. There is something sorrowful about the machinery, not in its function, but in its loneliness. For the Dwemer built not only for themselves, but for the future. They expected someone would come, someone would inherit, but they also believed that only those worthy, those who understood the harmonies they had uncovered, should be allowed to proceed. They did not imagine a future where they were forgotten. In some chambers, pipes still echo with faint sound, not mechanical, melodic, patterns that repeat across decades, undisturbed by time. Are they messages, signals, songs meant for ears that no longer exist? It is impossible to say. Even among the Dwemer, tonal mastery was rare, a high discipline, taught in silence and memorized not with the mind, but with the soul. One had to be tuned to the knowledge, harmonized with the teaching. For some, tonal alignment was natural. For others, it was a lifetime of discipline, and some could never hear the tone at all. And so it may be with us. Modern scholars can trace the outline of their thinking. We can name their devices, dissect their constructs, follow their pathways through the ruins, but we cannot hear as they heard. We do not know the frequencies that held their world together, and so the doors remain closed, the machines remain unresponsive, the meaning just beyond reach. There is a sorrow in this forgetting, as though a great song was sung once, perfectly, and no one thought to record it, and now we wander through its echoes, trying to find the first note. Not to repeat it, but to understand why it was ever sung. The tonal masters, the true shapers of Dwemer reality, are long gone. Their names do not remain, their works endure, but without signature. They were not artists seeking legacy, they were engineers chasing unity. To them, the perfection of the structure was the only remembrance they required, and perhaps that is why their disappearance is so profound. For when the Dwemer vanished, they left behind everything, every hall, every machine, every line of etched brass, but not themselves. Not even a whisper, not even a body. It was not departure, it was cessation. And yet their tones still hum in forgotten places. Doors still wait to be opened. Songs still echo in the pipes. The silence, once again, does not lie still. It listens. There are places in the world where breath seems to falter, where the air presses close as if it too remembers. In the forgotten strongholds of the Dwemer, beneath stone so ancient it weeps with warmth, there rests not only the dust of a vanished people, but an intent that never faded. One does not stumble into these places. They find you when the time is quiet enough. In the southern slopes of Skyrim, nestled beneath the jagged bones of the Velothi Mountains, lies the ruin of Archthams. Few enter, and fewer still return. The walls are fractured, yet even in collapse, they retain a kind of symmetry that defies time. Brass fixtures refuse to tarnish. Light, though absent, reflects in impossible ways across polished stone, and always the sound, the gentle pulse of something unseen, slow and steady, as though the ruin itself breathes. Scholars once believed Archthams to be a simple foundry, a place for forging the great constructs, but recovered fragments from expedition logs suggest something else entirely. It may have been a cathedral, not in the spiritual sense, but a place of tonal convergence, a hall where sound and stone were brought together in deliberate harmony, a sanctuary of resonance. Some referred to it as the chamber of the deep note. In such a chamber, the tonal masters would gather, their tools tuned and voices trained, not for worship, but for adjustment. There ripple outward into machines, into constructs, even into the city itself. Their hammers and forks shaped the unseen strings of reality. To them, sound was not heard, it was seen, felt, manipulated. The deep note, as described in lost journals, was a tone so low and so vast it could not be fully perceived by any single ear. It resonated through stone, through brass, through water. It was not created, it was found. Discovered in the fabric of the world, and harnessed, however briefly, some believed it was the original vibration, the tone that formed Nirn, still echoing in the bones of mountains and the stillness of caverns. Others warned that to strike it was to invite collapse. A recovered inscription from beneath the broken arch of the main chamber reads, in careful Dwemer script, "That which is bound by tone may be undone by silence. Proceed with measure." A warning, perhaps, or a record of failure. No one living can be certain. Yet in Arctharms the silence speaks more clearly than any voice. There are murals there, hidden beneath layers of calcified steam. With careful light and patience, one can make out shapes, brass figures aligned beneath a central form, towering, faceless. It is not the Numidium, for it lacks the proportions, nor is it Kagranak, who is often depicted with hammer and visor. This figure holds no tools. Its hands are open, empty. Around it are arcs of sound, illustrated with concentric lines, radiating outward. Some interpret this as the moment of ascension, others, the moment of loss. And among those who have stood in that room, among the ruins and the quiet, more than one has reported the sensation of tone, not heard, but pressed gently against the ribs. A vibration in the bones, pulsing with unnatural regularity. It fades when one speaks aloud. It returns with the silence. Perhaps the deep note was not a moment, but a condition. A state of being the Dwemer learned to enter, to shape the world not by force, but by frequency. If so, it was not merely their machines they tuned, but themselves, their minds, their presence, and in that alignment they may have found a door no one else has seen. It is no great stretch to imagine that such a people, so attuned to the harmonics of existence, might eventually wish to rewrite their own frequency, not to die, not to transcend in the spiritual sense, but to shift, tune themselves into another state, unbound from time, from flesh, from even memory. And what of the Numidium? What role did the deep note play in its forging? Some sources, barely legible, copied in haste by Dwemer scribes, suggest that the Numidium was never meant to awaken in the manner of other golems. It was not to act but to be, a harmonic anchor, drawing the tones of reality into itself. It was a silence wrapped in brass, a mirror not of the gods but of possibility. The tribunal would later use it, briefly, with results that splintered chronology itself. The warp in the west stands as testament. But the Dwemer did not intend such chaos. They were not makers of war, but of equations. If the Numidium fractured time, it was not because they wished to destroy, it was because others used it without understanding the tone. Perhaps in their final act, the Dwemer struck the deep note within themselves, resonated their souls into alignment with some truth only they perceived, and in doing so, passed beyond the frame of Nirn. Gone, not vanished. Present, but untouchable. Not gods, not ghosts, but memory without form. And that is why their ruins remain, why their machines walk still, why their halls hum not with decay, but with waiting, waiting for the tone, waiting for the note that will one day bring them back, or silence them forever. Until then, Arctharms and its kin sit beneath the world, listening, their brass limbs unmoving, their gears patient. The halls remember, the walls still vibrate, the silence still sings. We listen now, as they once did. And perhaps if the world grows quiet enough, we will hear what they heard. The first sound, the last silence. And the space between. There is a certain stillness that lives beneath the earth. It is not the absence of noise, but the presence of something deeper, something older. In the ancient chambers of the Dwemer, that stillness takes form. It presses against the skin, like breath held too long, and whispers through the bones of stone and brass alike. Not a warning, not a welcome, only a waiting. Among the most enigmatic of Dwemer constructs are those who yet move. They walk without masters. In halls long cold, where no living hand stokes the fires and no voice calls for service, the machines persist, clanking, hissing, turning upon gears untouched by decay. Their movements are not random, their patrols follow paths once laid with deliberate intent. It is as if they do not know their creators are gone, or perhaps they do, and persist anyway, bound not by command, but by the memory of purpose. In the annals of the Synod and the deepest vaults of the College of Winterhold, there are diagrams, half legible, half theorized, of what the Dwemer called animedex, thought engines. Logic cores woven not with wires, but with tonal sequences. These were not merely processes of instruction, but receptacles of memory, of identity. Within them, it is believed, were encoded the principles of obedience, not through fear or pain, but through resonance. These constructs do not think as we do. They are not aware in the sense that men or mare are, but they remember. In rhythm, in pulse, in pattern. Some claim that the centurions, the great walking brass forms with steam in their veins, are not merely machines, but echoes of the Dwemer themselves, or at least of their will. Programs etched so deeply into brass and gem that even in the absence of life they endure. There is an account from a wandering scholar who spent a year within the ruins of Mizileft, avoiding the patrolling constructs by moving only when the sound of their footsteps aligned with her heartbeat. She wrote that she began to dream in rhythms, that the machines spoke, not with words but with repetition. Every cycle, every turn, a sentence in an unknown grammar. One night, beneath the great dome of the collapsed observatory, she reported hearing a sound, a harmonic chime that pulsed through the ground itself. Every machine in the ruins ceased moving for one long moment, as though listening. Then, as if satisfied, they resumed. She left the next day. No one who read her journals has ever been able to reproduce that tone. And so the constructs walk, still, guarding empty halls, opening and closing valves whose purpose no longer exists. Some repair each other. Some tend to structures that no longer serve function. They are not machines in the common sense. They are not tools. They are systems. Living blueprints of thought made solid. It is believed that each construct contains within it a fragment of the original harmonic code, not a full identity, but a thread, a strand in the greater design. If this is true, then every walking machine is a note, one tone in the larger symphony of the Dwemer's final expression. And if they are notes, what song do they still play? In the ruins of Nchuleftunth, deep in the ash-choked lands of Vardenfell, a sealed chamber was discovered. It held no treasure, no weapon, only a dais, at its center surrounded by 12 constructs arranged in a perfect circle, their eyes dim, their limbs folded. They faced inward, unmoving, as if awaiting a conductor who will never arrive. No mechanism was found to activate them. No trap, no spell, only an inscription, in faded Dwemerus, chiseled into the stone above. When the measure returns, the cycle shall complete. The measure, the tone, the unifying sound. This phrase appears elsewhere, in deeper ruins, in older stone. It was not a motto. It was a promise. It may be that the constructs await that sound still, not merely as machines obeying dormant instruction, but as participants in a suspended ritual, one not of destruction, nor of protection, but of return. If this is true, then the Dwemer did not program their creations for war or for power, but for remembrance. They seeded the world with rhythm, with motion, with steps and turns and pulses that continue long after their voices fell silent. And it is this persistence, this rhythmic continuation, that separates the Dwemer from every other vanished race. Others left tombs, temples, words carved in reverence. The Dwemer left motion. Even in disappearance they maintained pattern. In this, perhaps, is their truest legacy, the rhythm that does not fade, the constructs that continue, not to guard, not to learn, but simply to be. Machines as music, movements as memory, and so the deep halls remain alive in their own way. Not in mind, nor in soul, but in motion, a kind of dreaming that does not end. And if one listens closely, not with ears, but with stillness, the machines speak, not in language, not in command, but in return. Each step they take, each turn of a gear, is an echo of a decision made long ago, a final message cast into the world, not in ink, but in pattern. We watch them. They do not watch us. They move not for us, but for something that has not yet returned, and perhaps never will. Still, the rhythm continues. Still, the silence waits. Still, the constructs walk, far below the green-swept plateaus of Hammerfell. Beneath the dry skin of the Alikir, there lies a buried breath, an unending sigh of gears and dust, forgotten by time and untouched by sun. In the deep subterranean vaults of Stroh's Mackay and across the desert highlands, the ruins of the Rukan clan slumber still, their machines stiff with waiting. Here, the silence is different. It does not weigh, it whispers. The brass does not gleam, it broods. The Rukan were the wanderers, exiles not by force but by will. When the other Dwemer clans allied with the Khymer to form the First Council of Resdayn, the Rukan rejected the union. Their leader, angry beyond reconciliation, hurled his mighty warhammer, Volindrung, into the sky. According to myth, he vowed to settle wherever the hammer landed. It flew for days, crossing mountain and sea, until it crashed into the dry sands of what would become Hammerfell. There, the Rukan built. They carved into the rocks and shaped their machines beneath the sand, away from the heart of Dwemer society. But they did not sever themselves from its mind. Their understanding of tonal law, their grasp of Dwemer physics, their pursuit of harmony within mechanism, all remained intact, though coloured by solitude. If the Deep Elves were ever united in purpose, they were diverse in execution. The Rukan, in their isolation, became something sharper, colder, more defiant. Their cities, such as Volenfell and Vethu and Mizanchech, were not just structures, but fortresses of conviction. Each chamber bore no ornamentation, no murals or shrines, only function. Efficiency became aesthetic. The art of the Rukan was clarity. The symbol of their pride was not song, but silence. And yet, beneath that silence, the same old harmonics endured. In the ruins of Volenfell, uncovered briefly by Redguard scholars before being reburied by shifting sands, explorers reported long halls tuned to specific frequencies. When a tone was struck by voice, by stone, by accident, the chamber responded. Some walls shimmered faintly, some mechanisms stirred, and in one instance, an entire section of corridor rotated upon itself, revealing stairs that had been sealed for unknown centuries. But the most enigmatic discovery was a room with no doors, no windows, only pillars. Each pillar hummed softly, a different note, constantly and imperceptibly. Together they created a drone, deep, sonorous, patient. It never ceased. No matter the interference, no matter the attempts to disrupt it, it was not music, it was presence. One of the scholars, before the shifting dunes forced their retreat, described it in her final log. It is not a song we can sing. It is something that was always playing, and we have only now entered the room in which it is heard. The implications were troubling. Did the Rukan believe the world itself was built upon a foundation of constant tone? Did they, through isolation, come closer to hearing it? Was this not silence, but a deeper resonance, too low, too long, too vast for most to perceive? Some suggest that the Dwemer of Hammerfell, cut off from the political workings of Resdayn, turned inward, that their experiments took on new shape, not in the manipulation of power, but in the observation of its nature. They sought not to change the world, but to understand its frame, its lattice, its pulse, to hear it in its totality. And what they heard may have frightened them. The tonal sequences found in Rukan ruins differ subtly from those found in Vardenfell and Skyrim. The intervals are wider, the structures more modular, as if they had begun to hear something beyond the harmonies known to their kin, something closer to the edges of the void. There are reports, unconfirmed, but persistent, of strange dreams among those who explore Rukan sites. Dreams not of visions, but of tones, long, drawn chords that resonate in the skull long after waking. Some say these are echoes of tonal experiments too deep for our minds. Others whisper that the machines themselves are singing, very slowly over years and decades, a single long note that only the unconscious can perceive. And in those dreams, always, there is one recurring image, a great door of stone and brass, locked, but not sealed, waiting. The Rukan, though separate, did not vanish separately. At the moment of the Great Disappearance, they too were taken. Their constructs still walk, their lights still burn, their silence remains. And yet, in Hammerfell, the ruins feel different. There is a sense, not of sorrow, nor mystery, but of resistance. as though even now, the stone remembers what it was made to defy. That here, more than anywhere else, the Dwemer sought to keep their secrets, not only from the world, but from time itself. If the Rorcan discovered something within the deep harmonics of the world, something that cannot be spoken, only heard, it remains buried beneath the dunes. Not forgotten, but guarded. And still in certain winds, if one stands very still among the broken columns of Volamfell, a low tone can be felt, more than heard. A resonance that stirs the ribs, that pulls at the thought. That reminds, they were not gods. They were not saints. They were not vanished. They were listening. And perhaps, still are. Deep beneath the snow-veiled peaks of Skyrim, past stone halls locked in frost and centuries, lies the ancient ruin of Blackreach, an expanse so vast, so secret, it defies the very notion of ruin. It is not merely a structure or a city, but a world beneath the world. There in endless twilight, bioluminescent mushrooms tower like trees, and the air hangs heavy with shimmer. It is a realm of quiet wonder and deeper dread, a place where the Dwemer did not just build but live. Blackreach was not meant to be found. It is said that only the deepest mechanisms of Nzincha left, Alftand, and Raldptar aligned to open its way, that one must walk a path not marked by signs, but by memory, not by map, but by resonance. When the right tonal locks are struck, the ancient lift groans to life, revealing the descent, and those who enter step not into a dungeon, but into a sanctum, crafted, not abandoned. The scale of Blackreach speaks not of a hidden lair, but of ambition unbound. There are towers with no clear purpose, bridges to nowhere, empty plazas surrounding machines that do not stir, a sky of glowing stone arcs overhead, giving the illusion of stars. But there is no sky here, only the simulation of one, a mimicry of surface life, crafted not for deception, but for contemplation. This was not an outpost, it was a heart. Many scholars believe Blackreach was the central nexus of Dwemer experimentation in Skyrim, where tonal architecture met with natural force. Here, magma veins and glowing geodes pulse beneath dwarven metal. Here, water is channeled through impossible pipes, reducted across entire caverns, not to irrigate, but to the very landscape feels tuned. Each structure placed as part of a greater score, a silent music that shapes the air itself. And at its center, glowing in constant pulse, stands the Tower of Mzark. The tower is small, compared to the surrounding city, but its purpose outweighs its size. For within it lies a device of unfathomable precision, the lexicon mechanism, an orrery of light and sound, glass and brass, designed to hold and read Elder Scroll. No other race would dare attempt such a thing. The Elder Scrolls are not books in the common sense. They are events, possibilities woven into divine parchment, their meanings shifting with the reader, with time, with will. To read one without preparation is to invite blindness, madness, or worse. But the Dwemer did not read the scrolls. They listened. The lexicon was their answer, a tonal interface that translated the unspeakable into vibration, into sound. They believed that truth was not in words, but in resonance, that the divine structure of existence could be rendered into tone, and so they built a device not to decipher, but to harmonize with the scroll, with time, with fate. They did not approach the divine through prayer or faith, but through calculation. The Tower of Mzark still stands, still waiting. Its mechanisms, when activated, respond not with voice, but with light that turns, gears that whisper, and always that subtle vibration through the floor, like the distant hum of a sleeping god. What did they hear? Some say it was the sound of the scrolls themselves, humming with countless truths. Others believe it was something beneath the scrolls, something older, a tone that binds all possible realities. The Dwemer called it the undersong, the echo beneath the pattern, a thread of vibration that connects every star, every soul, every silence. It may have been that, in Blackreach, they heard too much. Or perhaps, they heard only what they had always sought, the tone that would unmake death, silence the gods, and unlock the final door. There are rumors, quiet ones, that the lexicon still holds an imprint, a faint record of the Dwemer's last great attempt to interface with the divine. That, if tuned correctly, it might play back their final thoughts. Their last experiment, but no one has succeeded in unlocking it fully. The mechanisms remain sealed, responding only in part. Fragments of melody, flashes of light, as though the device remembers, but chooses not to share. Perhaps it waits, not for a scholar, but for a frequency. A resonance long forgotten, a soul in harmony with the one note the Dwemer tried to become. The constructs in Blackreach remain, wandering slowly along paths worn smooth by centuries of repetition. They do not speak, they do not change, but they move, always the same, as if still responding to orders long since given, as if Blackreach itself is still humming a command they cannot ignore. And the silence is not empty. It pulses, it breathes. Some who have visited say that time feels different there, not slower, but displaced, that memories bleed, that thoughts echo back before they are fully formed, that in the stillness one might hear footsteps that are not one's own, but no harm ever comes, only the sense of being observed, not by machines, not by ghosts, but by the place itself, as if Blackreach remembers, not what happened, but what was meant to happen, and in that remembrance, it waits, not for conquest, not for discovery, but for return, for the song to resume, for the silence to resolve, for the Dwemer to awaken not in body, but in tone. And until that day the tower stands. The scroll sleeps, the lexicon hums, and the cavern holds its breath. In the far-flung corners of Vardenfell, where the ashfall never ceases, and the sky always glows with the sullen light of Red Mountain, there lies a ruin, older than most remember. Nen Shadak, the library of a lost people, rests half-buried beneath the sea spray and salt of Saltzheim's northern shore. Time has not softened its edges. The walls still rise with the discipline of purpose, and the seals remain unbroken, not through power, but through understanding. Nancherdak was not merely a vault of knowledge, it was a construct of memory itself. The Dwemer did not store books as others did. They did not write for the eye, but for the ear. Every chamber was a node in a network of tonal archives. A single step through its corridors was to walk through generations of thought. Not in narrative, but in vibration. Where others scribed ink to parchment, the deep elves inscribed frequency into metal and gem. Memory was a song, thought was a pattern. Their history, their science, their speculation, it lived within resin. The heart of Nunshadak was the reading room, once illuminated not by flame, but by glowstones that responded to tonal pressure. There, the greatest of their scholars tuned crystalline lexicons, each one encoded with layers of meaning, a thought within a thought, a tone within a tone. And to unlock such a lexicon was not to read, it was to hear. Only those whose minds could enter the proper harmonic state could access the deeper strata of knowledge. For to the Dwemer, wisdom was not granted, it was earned through alignment. But not all knowledge was left open, even to their own. There are records, preserved in murky fragments and translated with painful precision, that speak of the silent vault, a room within Nanshadark known only to the tonal initiates. It was sealed by cords, not keys. To enter was to prove not loyalty, but resonant. It was believed to contain a codex, a single lexicon, unlike any other, written by Kagranak himself, not with words but with frequency. A tuning of thoughts so precise, so final, that to hear it was to understand everything the Dwemer had become. No one living has found this room, but the ruin still responds. When silence is observed, true silence, without spell, without voice, certain stones emit a soft harmonic hum, not random, not passive. A question, perhaps, an invitation. The scholars of the Second Era, under the banner of House Telvanni and later the Empire, attempted to replicate the tonal patterns within Ninshardak's machines. They succeeded in opening minor vaults, triggering ancient systems, even awakening slumbering sentinels, but the deeper secrets remained dormant. The machines responded, yes, but never revealed. They moved, but did not speak, as though they knew that the question was wrong, that the ones who asked were not the ones who should hear the answer. Some have theorized that Nanshadak holds not just the last lexicon of Kagranak, but the final recording of the Dwemer as a people. Not in story, but in tone. A farewell not spoken, but struck into metal. A sonic signature of departure encoded across the walls and vaults and stone, waiting only for the right frequency to unlock it. And what then? Would it reveal where they went? Would it echo their fate? Or would it simply stop, the tones ceasing as their presence did? Not in rupture, but in resolution. The chimer never spoke openly of Nshardak. The tribunal, though vast in knowledge and pride, left its name unuttered. The Telvanni feared its quiet, even as they envied its depth, and even the seekers of Hermaeus Mora, wandering far in their endless hunger for truth, treat the library of the deep ones with reverence, not greed. It is a place that watches, not with eyes, but with stillness, a record that has not yet been played, a scroll that is not read, but remembered. The idea of the lexicon in Dwemeric design is more than artifact. It is vessel, soul and song and schema forged into one. The shape of thought cast into permanence. And the lexicon believed to rest at the center of Nshardak, if it truly exists, would be the final note in their long design. Not a map, not a confession, but a frequency so precise it could resonate with the structure of reality itself. And perhaps that was always their goal. Not to escape, not to rule, but to write themselves into the world as tone. To live not as flesh or even machine, but as a song in the bones of the world. As vibration eternal. They believed the Aedra were flawed, bound to stasis. The Daedra, capricious and self-consuming. But the tonal realm, the pure field of resonance, was free. It did not change by will, but by alignment. To exist within it was not to become God, but to become law. If Nshardak holds that code, if it hums with their final alignment, then it is not merely a ruin. It is a tomb, a shrine, a frequency still ringing through the world, unheard by all but stone. And someday, when the world quiets enough, perhaps someone will hear it, not to bring them back, but to understand why they never returned. Until then, Nshardak dreams beneath the sea wind, its doors half sunk, its halls whispering. Not in words, not in memory, but in tone, always in tone. The brass-veined halls of the Dwemer do not erode, like others. Their edges do not round, their metals do not rust. They exist in stillness, not preserved but persistent, as if memory clings to them rather than time. And among these ancient sanctuaries there is one that stands apart, not in grandeur, but in absence. That place is Kagranzel, tucked high in the mountains of eastern Skyrim, away from roads, removed from trade, far even from other Dwemer ruins. Kagranzel is a mystery hidden within mystery. There are no sprawling cities here, no great machines in motion, no guardians that patrol, only silence, pierced by strange echoes that respond not to sound, but to presence. The approach is narrow, stone pathways broken and brittles. Snow lays heavy upon the gate, yet the doors remain untouched by ice. Within, the first chamber rises unnaturally high, a vertical moor of stone and metal. Hanging in its center is a crystalline orb suspended by nothing, pulsing faintly with internal light. There are no controls, no signs of function. Yet those who step beneath it report the same feeling, a sudden lift, a weightlessness in body and thought. Then a fall, not a fall in space, but in state. The orb, it is said, does not kill, it removes. What is removed remains debated. Some say it is a test, an old tonal calibration device, meant to measure the soul's resonance. Others say it is punishment, meant to isolate flawed vibrations from the wholes. Still others, quieter and more afraid, whisper that it is not Dwemer at all, that Kagranzel is a wound, not a ruin, a place where something went wrong, and the silence is not peace, but a scream trapped in stasis. There are no records of Kagranzel in the known lexicons, no tonal maps, no aligned constructs. Even the Chimer, meticulous in their bitterness, speak of it only in passing. They called it the Hollow of Judgment, and avoided it even in their conquest. But beneath the main chamber lies the true enigma. A chasm, not carved but collapsed. Stone gives way to blackness, and in that blackness, a sense not of depth, but of directionless distance. The fall is not measured in feet, but in time, and those who survive it speak of strange visions during the descent. Great wheels turning in the void, strings of light stretched between stars, voices humming in languages older than breath, and then silence. They land, not in ruin, but in an underground lake, still, clear, perfectly round. There are no walls, only shadow, no paths, only reflection. In that dark water, something ancient stirs. Not a creature, not a machine, a presence. It does not move, but it feels near, close to thought, closer to self. Khagrenzel is unlike other Dwemer ruins, not because of what it contains, but because of what it remembers. It is a place built around a moment, a stillness, a final chord never resolved. Some tonal scholars believe Khagrenzel may have been the site of the first tonal experiment. Not in crafting, not in building, but in alteration. Here they say, the Dwemer attempted to change something not outside themselves, but within. A resonance test, on the soul, on consciousness, a calibration of reality's perception, rather than its function. The name Khagrenzel itself may offer meaning. It is thought to derive from Khagrenak, the tonal architect, and Zel, the Dwemer word for blessed, or chosen. Thus Khagrenzel may mean Khagrenak's chosen. Or more chillingly, those judged by Khagrenak. Was this a proving ground? A place where tonal purity was tested before more ambitious experiments were undertaken? Was it the beginning of the path that led to Red Mountain, or was it the site of failure? For unlike other ruins, Khagrenzel offers no sign of habitation, no signs of life. Only the device, the fall, and the lake. No documents, no constructs, only echo and weightless descent. Perhaps it was a chamber of silence, not in ignorance, but in precision, a place where all tones were stripped away, where the soul was left bare. In some recovered Dwemer equations, scratched into forgotten rods, etched on collapsed walls, there is mention of divergent resonance, a theoretical state in which a soul vibrates against the harmony of mundus. It is said such a state causes detachment, a slippage from the known laws of space and time. Khagrenzel may have been where they induced this. If so, then it is not a ruin, but a wound, a moment suspended, forever, echoing its last note. And those who step within risk not death, but dissonance. They return altered. Not visibly, not obviously, but the tonal field around them is changed. Crystals react differently, stones hum slightly off-key, and their dreams are full of weightless falls, again and again, without end. There is something unspoken within Khagrenzel, and perhaps that is the truest thing about it, that some places are not meant to be known, that some silence cannot be filled with understanding, and in the deepest parts of the world, where even stone does not whisper, the Dwemer left not an answer, but a question, a silence so perfect it becomes sound, a resonance that unmakes, a tone that does not ring, but waits for the next note, waits for the resolution, waits perhaps for us. The stone remembers, though it does not breathe, nor move, nor sing in the ways of living things. It remembers through weight, through echo, through silence. There is a depth beneath Nirn's crust where memory becomes more than metaphor, where the very walls thrum with the stories of those who shaped them. In the heart of Red Mountain, beneath the ash and the hollow roar, lies the most sacred and secret of all Dwemer places, the fortress of Dagothur and the deep chambers of Deliwunda, near the core of the Great Disappearance. Here, it is said, the Dwemer stood closest to godhood and closest to erasure. This was the seat of Khagrenak's work. This was the threshold of the Numidium. Here the heart of Lorcan pulsed, chained in its prison of brass and myth, stolen from under mountain and memory. The gods had buried it. The Dwemer unearthed it. Not in reverence, but in inquiry. Where others saw divinity, they saw power, not to worship, but to refine. The Dwemer believed that the heart was not a gift nor a curse, but a key, a fragment of the world's song, a tone held too long. They did not wish to revive Lorcan, nor replace him. They sought to reverse his rhythm, to rewrite their presence upon the skein of the mundus. Not as mortals, not as spirits, but as constants. In the deepest halls of Brethunder, where Kagranak worked in solitude, stood the tools, Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard. Not weapons in the martial sense, but instruments of tonal manipulation, each crafted with unbearable precision, tuned not to kill, but to reshape. Keening struck not steel, but the soul. Sunder broke not bone, but pattern. Wraithguard did not shield the body, it shielded from transformation itself. Kagranak's aim was not madness, it was mastery. To reach beyond mortality without ascending, to remain in the world, but untouchable. Not gods, not Daedra, not Aedra, but tones made flesh. The Dwemer wished to become the silence between the stars. There are no clear accounts of what happened next, only echoes. Contradiction. Some say the heart answered them with violence, that the moment of alignment tore their frequencies asunder, dissolving them into the very tone they sought to master. Others believe they succeeded, that their disappearance was not failure, but conclusion, that they left the plane of flesh and stepped into the tonal substratum, forever humming at the edge of perception. Vivid claimed it was hubris that their attempt to defy the divine order brought upon them the righteous collapse of their being. But even he, in his sermons, wrote of the Dwemer echo, still faintly heard in the stones of Vardenfell. The heart continued to beat. The Numidium, unfinished, stood hollow. And the Dwemer, once the most grounded of all peoples, became myth. What remains of their legacy in Brethunder is not structure, but vibration. The halls still hum, the stones still pulse. Tonal harmonics ripple from brass panels long still, and within the core chamber, near where the heart once hung, there are grooves in the stone, not made by hands, but by resonance etched by vibration, again and again, into curves of impossible precision. Some have theorized that the Dwemer transformed themselves into zero-sum harmonics, a state in which presence equals absence, and thus cancels itself from observable reality. Not death, not ascension, but flattening, a removal from time through alignment. And what of the Numidium, the brass god without a soul, the thought without a center? It would be awoken by others, first by the tribunal, then by Tiber Septim, then again in a dozen uncertain realities. Each time, the same distortion, collapse, the warp in the west, the fracturing of time, not in cataclysm, but in divergence, as if the Numidium was never meant to act, but simply to be, a mirror of existence itself, turned in. The Dwemer may have understood this. They may have built the god not to conquer, but to understand, to hold the heart, to echo the final tone. And when that tone was struck, when Kagranak applied the tools in perfect sequence, something ancient shifted. A door opened, not one of brass, not one of stone, a door of tone, and through it, they stepped, not forward, not upward, but inward, into the Hume, into the silence, into the frequency from which all things rise. And so their cities remain, their machines walk, their halls breathe, because though they are gone, they are not absent, they are resonant. The disappearance was not an end, it was a change of key, and perhaps one day, when the world forgets the shape of noise, when the last surface voice has grown still, the echo will return, faintly, soft. The tonal thread will tremble once more, and the silence will not be silence anymore. It will be the Dwemer, still speaking, still becoming, still present. There are places where the world folds in on itself, not visibly, not with torn earth or broken sky, but subtly, like a memory shifting under thought. One such place lies in the Velathi Mountains, between the jagged stone of Morrowind and the colder bones of Skyrim. There, nestled in forgotten snowdrifts, is the ruin of Rakund, seldom named, seldom sought. It bears no great history. No songs were written of it, and no wars were fought over its treasures, and yet it lingers in the oral memory of mountain people, as a place where iron breathes and time listens. Few reach, fewer return. Those who do speak not of danger, but of stillness, not just the absence of noise, but a deeper quiet, as though the ruin consumes not only sound, but intention. Those who wander within report strange lapses in awareness, walking for hours and finding they have not moved, looking at walls that seem to shift, not physically, but contextually, as though the ruin is uncertain of its own shape. This is not madness, it is tonal dissonance. Rakund, as some tonal arcanists believe, was not a city or a forge, but a harmonic observatory. Its chambers were built, not to hold, but to hear, to capture and contain echoes, not of voice or vibration, but of possibility. The Dwemer understood time, not only as movement through events, but as a resonance across choices. They sought to detect the hum of decisions before they were made, to identify paths not yet taken. In Rakund, they attempted to build instruments that could listen to the divergence of time. These were the selexes, large, lens-like mechanisms, aligned with calibrated orbs and spinning brass arms. When struck with the proper tone, they rotated gently, not according to gravity or heat, but by responding to the temporal pressure of nearby thoughts. They did not read minds, they weighed them. There is a preserved fragment in a Dwemer tonal tablet, now hidden in the archives of the Synod, which reads, "When choice approaches, the world hums intention. We will learn to hear this hum and walk before the step is taken." Not prophecy, not prescience, preparation. To the Dwemer, freedom was not chaos, but tuning. If one could learn the harmonics of potential, one could walk within probability as easily as corridors. Kund, then, was a place not of answers, but of questions asked before asking. But there are implications far deeper than theory. For if Kund's devices were truly able to detect divergence, if its walls did resonate with time's tremble, then the disappearance of the Dwemer was not only an act of tonal manipulation, but one carefully chosen across layered timelines. It was not a mistake. It was not a sudden shift. It was a selective resonance, chosen from among infinite variations, a deliberate vanishing. Theories suggest that, at the heart of Rakund, was the chorus vault, a chamber where harmonics of multiple timelines were recorded, not as sound, but as interference. Dissonances that occurred when futures overlapped too closely. Here, the Dwemer may have tuned their presence against possible outcomes, aligning themselves with only the timeline that resonated perfectly with their final design. In this view, the disappearance was not destruction, it was clarification. They erased themselves, not from reality, but from uncertainty. And what remains? The empty cities, the unceasing machines, the unfinished God, is not wreckage, but residue. That which did not harmonize was left behind. The Dwemer, now in alignment, left the discordant elements to fall away. It is said that one scholar from High Rock spent years in Rakund, meditating beneath the silexes. He wrote nothing, said nothing. When he returned, he simply whispered, "They are not gone. They are simply walking straighter lines than we can perceive." And perhaps that is true. For time, to them, may not have been linear. Not a river, but a chord, struck and sustained. To vanish, then, was to strike the note with such clarity that all other tones were quieted. And yet, the silence of Rakund is not complete. There are moments, rare and inexplicable, when the air hums slightly against the skin, when a feeling arises not thought, but recollection, as if something is brushing past you unseen, but not unfelt. The walls vibrate faintly, not at random, always in the same pattern, a 3-beat pulse, soft, soft, silence. Some believe this is the last echo of the Dwemer's departure, a heartbeat held in stasis. Others think it is a message, still resonating, awaiting reply. But from whom? From us? Or from another time? The answer, like so much of Dwemer craft, remains hidden, not in darkness, but in misalignment. The frequencies are still there. The silence is still full. We simply do not yet know how to hear it. And so Rakund rests, its doors sunken beneath snow, its instruments still aligned, not waiting to be activated, but waiting for someone whose thoughts hum in key. And until that moment, the mountain stands, and the stones listen, and the hum persists. Soft, soft, silence. When ash falls upon brass, it does not tarnish, it consecrates. Such is the fate of Mzarkus, the hidden sanctuary beneath Vardenfeld's southern spine, where the ash of Red Mountain does not choke, but settles gently across stone and steel, like memory gathering itself, This ruin, half buried and half sunken, once served a purpose not spoken of in any living lexicon. Its name survives only in fragment, and yet its tone persists. Mizarchus was not a city, nor was it a forge, nor a library, nor a vault. It was an interface, a convergence point where tones could be translated not into commands, nor knowledge, but into form. Here, the Dwemer are believed to have tested the limits of expression through resonance. No longer content to shape the world through tools and machines, they turned inward, seeking to create matter from the pure act of harmonic thought, to build not with hand, but with soul. The chamber at its heart was round, polished to near reflection, and geometrically perfect. Not one stone was out of line. The floor itself was a massive plate of resonant alloy, designed to respond to pressure in song. Step upon it, and it would respond with tone. Movement was music, intention was structure. The Dwemer called it the living scale. Standing within, a tonal engineer could, so it is claimed, shape small objects from the air itself, pulling brass into form through the pattern of motion and the focus of thought. A kind of harmonic conjuration, not magical, but mechanical at its root. Tonal metallurgy, brought to its zenith. It was never widely used, not because it failed, but because it worked too well. There are only 2 inscriptions recovered from Mizarchus that mention the living scale. One is etched along the rim of a tuning orb. If a man walks the tone of the gods, his shape will follow. The second is engraved in a much older script, on the outer chamber wall, just beneath a cracked section, now lost to collapse. Do not hewn what you are not prepared to become. What did they fear? Not madness. The Dwemer did not speak in fears, but in constraints. They knew that every tone struck within the world ripples, and every ripple reshapes what it touches. To step upon the living scale was to speak to the structure of reality, and reality listened. Mizarchus may have been the test before the greater experiment. The attempt to shape not just object, but identity. Not body, but being. If the Dwemer could forge matter through tonal intention, what would stop them from forging self? To remove all impurities of mortality, to rewrite the soul as structure. A final alignment with their own design. But as with all precision, even the slightest imperfection could cause collapse. There are reports filtered through half-truths and myth that during one of the final experiments in Mizarchus, an engineer walked the entire scale step by step, note by note. Witnesses claimed his body began to shimmer, then him, until light passed through him as if he were glass. He had not vanished, but had become harmonic, visible only in sound. His outline trembled with each word spoken nearby, like a ripple on still water. He did not survive, not because he was broken, but because the world could not hold him anymore. The Dwemer did not repeat the test. Instead, they sealed the chamber, folded it inward, and left it beneath the ash. Not as a failure, but as a caution, as a whisper, left for no one. And now, those who enter Mizarchus find the scale cracked, still resonant, but fragmented. It no longer sings in whole tones, but in dissonant echoes. What was once precise has become questioned. And in that fractured music, something else emerges, a faint hum, not from the structure, but from the air itself. As if the ruin has memory, as if it still dreams of what it once was. And perhaps that dream, too, is part of the Dwemer legacy. Not merely what they built, but what they dared to become. Tonal scholars have long argued that the Dwemer sought to erase the boundaries between creation and creator, that they wished not to worship divinity, but to imitate its mechanisms. Not in arrogance, but in symmetry, to walk the world in harmony, to strike the right tone, and allow the tone to carry them forward. And if Mizarchus was the place where they stepped closest to that edge, then it remains not as a grave, but as a mirror, a place that shows not what was, but what could be. But the mirror is cracked, and the echo is faint, and the Dwemer are gone, not destroyed, but played. Like a note so perfect, it can only be struck once, and then never again. And still, the scale waits beneath ash, beneath silence, listening for the footstep that hums in key. Some ruins speak through ruin, through their brokenness, their hollow halls, their crumbled pillars, and the soot that clings to their breathless air. Others, however, speak through absence. Not the absence of form, but the absence of flaw. Cowdham's, the seamless vault, nestled in the shadowed cliffs of northern Hammerfell, is one such place. Time has passed through it, but time has not touched it. Its corridors remain unmarred, its panels untarnished, its doors sealed not by locks or force, but by perfect fit, their seams invisible to even the closest eye. It is as though the ruin remains, not because it was forgotten, but because it resisted forgetting. Here, the Dwemer did not carve space from stone. They assembled space itself. Every wall, every corner, every arch is harmonically attuned, not to function, but to precision. It is whispered among Dwemeric scholars that Betham's was not constructed, only that still reverberates within its unseen core. No gears turn in Betham's, no sentries patrol its thresholds, and yet it lives, a low, nearly imperceptible hum, can be felt and not heard beneath one's feet when standing still within its deeper halls. It is not a sound, it is a pressure, a reminder that something remains active, though nothing appears to move. The tonal engineers who visited Betham's in the early 4th era returned shaken, not by danger, not by discovery, but by the incompleteness of their understanding. One scholar wrote in private, "It is not that Betham's lacks imperfection, it is that it refuses to acknowledge our perception of imperfection. We walk through rooms that seem to realign when we blink, as if they are correcting us, not themselves. But the Mars, it seems, is not broken. It is closed, a sealed thought, a complete pattern, a structure designed not for habitation nor experimentation, but for containment. But what then is contained? No records mention Betham's directly. Its name appears only once, etched faintly onto the edge of a shattered lexicon, recovered from Arcatham's, where it is paired with an obscure term in Hulisex, translated variously as echo lock, tone barrier, or more ominously, resonant exile. This suggests that Betham's was not built as part of the Dwemer's rising arc, but as a consequence of one of its crises. Perhaps it was their first failure. Perhaps it was their final vault. One theory, long suppressed by traditional scholars, posits that the Dwemer, in one of their tonal experiments, birthed a resonance so discordant, so dangerously misaligned with the world's harmonic structure, that they were forced to contain it, not through destruction, but through silence. This silence was not merely the absence of sound, it was a harmonic null, a place where tone cannot be struck, where resonance collapses upon itself, a chamber of absolute dissonance. The core of Betham's, then, may be not a device, not a relic, but a song that cannot be heard, a place that resists knowing, even by the gods. Perhaps this is why the Adra never answer when invoked near its gates. Perhaps this is why the Daedra do not linger. Even silence, after all, must submit to the world's rhythm. But Betham's defies rhythm, it consumes it, and so, in the shadow of its halls, the mind falters. Some who enter report the sensation of their own memories slipping sideways, time stuttering, not forward or back, but outward, as if the ruin is pressing gently against the self, not violently, but persistently, like wind against an old door. Most leave before reaching the inner chamber. None have opened it, but the seals remain perfect, unmoving, waiting. What lies beyond them may not be knowledge. It may not even be Dwemer. It may be the echo of their first mistake, held still within walls forged not of metal, but of alignment. Not buried for shame, but kept for balance. Because even perfection carries weight, even clarity casts a shadow. And Betham's may be the place where the Dwemer stored theirs, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Because to seek truth through tone is to shape the world, and to shape the world is to risk breaking it. So they built Betham's, a vault of stillness, a silence of intention, a room sealed by the understanding that some chords must never be struck again. And yet, the ruin persists, not eroded, not reclaimed, just closed, perfectly, waiting, but not for us, not for those out of tune, not for voices that tremble or minds that waver, waiting, perhaps for the one thought still humming in key, waiting for the return of the tone that was once cast out, waiting for silence to end. In the steaming canyons of southern Morrowind, where the land bleeds heat and stone sighs beneath the weight of its own memory, there stands a ruin so sunken into myth that many believe it never existed at all. Druskirchte, a name spoken in certain Daedric circles, though never without a pause, is known not for its machines nor its size, but for what the Dwemer may have seen there. It lies beyond the common maps, its entrance half swallowed by volcanic soil and time's slow erosion. Its outer face is unremarkable, another rusted door beneath basalt ridges, but beneath that door lies a chamber unlike any other. Unlike most Dwemer ruins which sprawl and descend with industrial intent, Druskirchte opens not downward, but inward, like a spiral of thought turning against itself. There is no machinery within, no constructs, no hissing steam or pressurized valves. Only silence and a strange, subtle wrongness in the proportions of the walls, angles that do not resolve, curves that do not obey. One step in Druskirchte is equal to 3 in thought. Rooms echo before sound is made, and time within drips unevenly, like oil across brass. Some scholars, cloaked in obscurity and discredited long ago, once believed that Druskirchte was a listening post, but not in the sense of military watchfulness. Rather, a site where the Dwemer listened for what lay outside, not in Etherius, not in oblivion, but in the interval between, that space between realities. The intertonal realm was of particular interest to certain tonal engineers toward the end of the First Era. As their understanding of harmonics deepened, so too did their questions. What, they asked, hums between the known spheres? What vibrations ring between the Edric echo and the Daedric roar? At Druskirchte, they attempted to answer that. According to disputed translations from a damaged tonal rod recovered near the ruin's surface, the Dwemer built a null array, a chamber designed to erase all known resonance, not mute it. Erase it. The chamber itself, still sealed by an alloy not found elsewhere on Nirn, was said to create a field so devoid of tonal interference that any vibration introduced would act in perfect isolation. A pure note, cast into silence, absolute. They sought to speak to what dwelled in that silence, not gods, not spirits, not even thought, but the unknown pattern, the whisper that precedes vibration. The tone before tone, and something, they believed, answered. What that answer was is not recorded. But one engineer, a tonal adept named Mizandil, left a final inscription upon his harmonics table, scrawled not in neat Dwemer runes, but by hand, as if rushed. There is a silence that listens back. After that, the inscriptions end. No further records, no return logs, only the sealed chamber, and a soft hum, imperceptible to most, that still radiates through the deepest walls of Druskirchte. Not a Dwemer hum, not mechanical, but stranger, lower. It does not pulse with life, it presses with intent. The Dwemer avoided the ruin, even before the disappearance. They spoke of it as tainted, not by Daedra but by something without name or face. A presence that did not hunger or judge. But note, a few Telvanni, curious in their arrogance, breached the outer corridors during the interregnum. They did not reach the core. What they did find was unsettling. Brass warped not by heat, but by pressure. Not dents, not breaks, but as if the metal had bent to accommodate a shape that was never meant to be perceived. They brought back no relics, only silence, and dreams of corridors that bent in loops, always returning to the same center. Even Hermaeus Mora, in his endless reach for knowledge, names Druskirchte in only one of his shadow scrolls. The ink was smeared, the script erratic. But a phrase could still be made out. The Dwemer who asked too early, and received a silence shaped like them. What does that mean? What shaped silence? What memory did the Dwemer cast into the space beyond sound? And what, in turn, remembered them? Some now wonder, was Druskirchte an experiment abandoned, or a seed planted, waiting still for a world quiet enough to grow its thought? Perhaps their disappearance was not singular. Perhaps there were many departures, many rooms where reality thinned, and one by one, the Dwemer stepped sideways. Not all at once, but in harmonics, in groups, in sequence. And Druskirchte was one such door, not built to escape, but to speak, not to the gods above, not to the princes beyond, but to what waits in the pause between breath and voice, the echo without origin, the shape without boundary, the tone that was not struck, but heard. And so Druskaschi remains, unmoved, unclaimed, unclosed, a question still humming faintly beneath the stone, not awaiting answer, but waiting for another voice to ask. To the north of High Hrothgar's silent slopes, where the voice of the world is tempered by snow and wind, there lies a place the Dwemer did not claim by conquest or inheritance, but by necessity. Raidsel, they called it, though the true pronunciation has long since faded, caught in the frozen space between breath and thought. Its entrance is shallow, a mere whisper along the mountainside, often mistaken for a trick of shadow or the overhang of ice. No smoke rises from it, no steam gives no hint of presence, and yet those who approach too closely feel the weight of stillness, as if the ruin does not sleep beneath the stone, but listens through it. Within, the air is different, not stale, not cold, but dense, as though memory has been layered upon itself over and over, until the very atmosphere thickens. This was no city, no forge. Raidsel was a containment point, an anchor of tonal stasis. The Dwemer, in their deepening inquiry into the nature of perception and permanence, recognized one constant flaw in their endeavors. Vibration begets change. Change was unpredictability, and so they sought to isolate change itself, to preserve thought unaltered, memory unspoiled, form unshaped. Here, in this frozen shrine to stillness, they built the harmonic vault, a chamber designed to resist time, not through shielding or stasis fields, but through equilibrium. At its center stood a device unlike any elsewhere in Dwemer ruins, a suspended lattice of crystalline discs, arranged in a pattern resembling the Dwemer glyph for reflection within reflection. These discs spun slowly, in opposing directions, creating a harmonic field that rendered all vibration equal and opposite. To step into the vault was to feel nothing, not numbness, but perfect cancellation. Every heartbeat echoed itself, every breath nullified. Thought became still, not erased, but so balanced that no ripple escaped. Why would they build such a place? Because they feared forgetting, not the fading of facts, but the loss of intention, the slow decay of tonal precision over generations. As their experiments deepened, their understanding became so complex that it no longer survived translation. Language failed, records distorted, and so they built Raidsel, not as a library of stone, but as a resonance echo, where memory could be stored, not in words, but in vibrationless presence. The harmonic vault, in theory, preserved not just knowledge, but the very consciousness of their tonal design, a place where the soul of their intent could dwell, unshaped by time. And perhaps, more haunting still, a place where someone might remain. Trapped? No, chosen. A guardian of memory not bound by flesh, but by balance. A tonal warden, and so the ruin waits unchanged. Its gears do not turn, its lights do not flicker. Because Raidsel exists in such perfect equilibrium that time itself finds no purchase. Brass does not corrode, stone does not crack. Ice forms and melts without disturbing the air. It is not stasis. It is not time. It is completion. And completion for the Dwemer was always a double-edged truth. For when something is perfect, it cannot evolve. And when something does not evolve, it does not survive change. This may have been their mistake, or it may have been their preparation. Because if Raidsel holds the final tone of their intent, if it contains the echo of their last alignment before the Great Disappearance, then it is not merely a ruin. It is a key, not one to open a door, but to remember how it was built. Some scholars believe the disappearance was not a single moment, but a progression. A great tuning, like a vast harmonic ritual performed across the known world, each ruin striking its own part of the final chord. And Raidsel was the pause, the held note before resolution. Even now, tonal mages who visit the ruin report odd disturbances in their instruments. Tuning forks that spin without striking, lenses that cloud when facing inward. One scholar even reported hearing her own thoughts spoken back to her, not in her voice, but in a purer tone, not an echo, but a correction. A memory being realigned. What does that mean? Is the ruin correcting those who enter, or reminding them? And if so, reminding them of what? Some believe that if one could listen long enough in Radsel, with all thought quieted and all vibration calmed, the vault would eventually sing, not aloud, but inward. A single tone, perfect and complete. The final thought of the Dwemer. Their last harmonic, not shouted, not whispered, simply remembered, waiting for someone to understand, not with mind or spell, but by resonance of soul. And so the vault remains, silent, whole, untouched, not by neglect, but by design. Because sometimes, the truest memory is the one that sings only to those who already carry its tone. West of Skyrim's jagged peaks, beneath the quiet snows of the Reach, rests a ruin rarely marked on maps and never spoken of in guidebooks. Arkant and Soothe, not to be confused with its Vardenfell ken, lies buried beneath mountain and mist, its outer structure long since erased by frost and landslide. It is a ruin almost entirely forgotten, except by those who dream of it. For Arkant and Soothe is a place of dream echo, not metaphorically, not poetically, but by design. The Dwemer who built it, if built is even the proper word, did so not to house thought, but to intercept it. Not thoughts spoken aloud, not words formed in the mind, but those strange phantoms that drift across sleep. Dreamer records, recovered from broken ciphers and half-preserved lexicons, reference something called the umbra neural, the shadow stream, said to flow beneath waking consciousness, linking the dreams of all sentient minds. Arkant and Soothe was meant to be an anchor cast into this stream. Here they hoped to study thought, before it congealed into identity, to glimpse the patterns of unformed cognition. For the Dwemer believed that what we call self was merely residue, the hardened sediment left behind by dreams flowing water. If one could map the current before the stone, one might reforge identity not as chance, but as craft. And so, beneath layers of snow and silence, they created the Chamber of Quiet Forms. Unlike other Dwemer chambers, this one was carved not in brass and stone, but in void. Its walls absorbed not just sound but reflection, mirrors that gave back nothing, tones that never echoed, light that dimmed upon entering. It is said by the very few who have found it and returned that no thoughts can be sustained inside that room. Not because of fear, but because the mind forgets how to structure itself. Not madness, but slippage. A gradual loosening of the thread that binds memory to name. One visitor, a Psygyptian monk named Velatis, wrote the following. I stood within the chamber for 1 hour. My name left me, first, then the shape of my father's face, then the word for why. I felt no fear, only a gentle hush, as if I was returning to a thought that had never belonged to me. I awoke in the snow. I remembered only the silence. Arkant and Sothe's machinery, if it can be called that, does not whir or move. It hums in conceptual intervals. Great spiraling pylons align its deeper halls, each carved with non-linguistic sigils, patterns more resonant than readable. When approached, they respond not with light or movement, but suggestion. Scholars who study tonal magic report that dreams following such visits become infected with strange geometries, shapes that spin in impossible dimensions, voices that speak in chords rather than words, memories that do not belong. What did the Dwemer find here? Some believe they were attempting to bypass mortality, not through elevation or erasure, but by reconstruction. That if identity could be observed in its most fluid form within the dream stream, it could be reconfigured, like notes on a scale, like metal shaped on an anvil. And perhaps the disappearance was not sudden at all. Perhaps it was a kind of slow dreaming, begun long before the heart was struck. A gradual descent into harmonic sleep, until at last, all that remained were echoes, not in the world of form, but in the soft world beneath it. Even now, travelers near the ruin report shared dreams, always the same, a brass corridor, winding and warm, a faint vibration, pulsing just behind the eyes, a figure in the distance, neither Dwemer nor man, walking deeper and deeper toward a soundless tone. When they wake, they remember no words, only a rhythm, only the suggestion that they had once known something, and it had been true, but the truth slips away. Like a name spoken just before waking, And this may be the secret of Arkantan Sotha. Not knowledge, but unlearning. Not ascension, but soft return. To a place before hardened into structure, before self was fixed. Before Dwemer and Mer and man and God and ghost were named. A place of potential. A place of still remembered silence. And so the ruin endures. Beneath snow. Beneath sleep. Not silent, but listen. For the next dream to pass through it. For the next soul to forget, and in forgetting, a lie. For the next moment, when memory becomes tone, and tone becomes door, and door becomes dream. And the Dwemer are there, humming, not gone, not waiting, just walking deeper. There is a rhythm in the deep places, where the world forgets to move, where heat no longer climbs and wind no longer sings. In such stillness, Ninchuntel endures not a ruin in the traditional sense, but a relic of stilled becoming, buried beneath the salt sands of elsewhere's northern frontier, where the dunes roll like time forgotten. The entrance to Ninchuntel lies have no name for this place. They do not go near it. They say the sand hums when the moons are low, that to dig there is to unearth voices no longer attached to mouths. But the Dwemer, quiet, calculating, saw something sacred in the silence, something incomplete. Here they performed their final experiments on what they called the divine absence. Not the gods, not their silence, but the void left where belief once rested. The Dwemer, ever skeptical of divinity, did not dismiss the gods outright. They questioned the space they occupied. Why does belief fill the world with structure? Why do we build our laws and lives around something unseen? To the Dwemer, this was not worship. It was architecture, and like all structures, it could be measured, reversed, empty. And Chinchol was built to be a kind of anti-temple, a space stripped of divine presence, not by ignorance but by design. Its central hall was geometrically constructed to produce what tonal engineers referred to as a harmonic vacuum, a region of absolute conceptual null. Step within it, and every known value, distance, direction, identity began to recede, not disappear, not fracture, but smooth, like wind-blown stone. What remains of the tonal diagrams suggests that this vacuum could absorb belief itself, not destroy it, but suspend it, make it weightless, make it relevant, and into that absence the Dwemer would walk. Why? Because they believed the soul was not a spark, not a gift, but a condition, a frequency produced by the shape of belief pressing against the shape of being. If belief could be removed, cleanly, completely, what then would the self become? Unshaped, untethered, or free? Some say that in Ninchunchel, the Dwemer achieved the first tonal soul inversion. That one among them, name unknown, rank forgotten, stood at the center of the vacuum and was unraveled, not as punishment, but as intent. He did not die. He did not scream. He simply ceased to be locatable. Not gone, not vanished. Just no longer reachable by resonance, no longer echoing. And yet, the harmonic recorders in the outer hall began to hum, a low, cyclical tone, repeating, but imperfect, as if a new tone had been born, one unbound by memory or context, one that did not know what it had once been. It is possible this was the first Dwemer soul ever truly rewritten, not transferred, not transformed, but tonally reauthored, an echo with no origin, a voice without name. The foundations of Chim and zero-sum philosophy tremble in such a space. The Transels may represent not a rejection of the world, but a removal from its dependencies. Not through power, not through divinity, through nullification. And the structure reflects this. No statues, no shrines, no plaques or carved lines of praise. Only walls smooth, symmetrical, silent. Only rooms designed to carry no echo. Only machines that hum without purpose. Still powered, perhaps. Still listening. And in the deepest chamber, unreachable now due to collapse and shifting sands, the Unchin rests, a great bronze bowl, suspended by nothing. It was never struck, for it was not built to sound. It was built to unsound, to erase the echo before it began, to nullify intent before it could take shape. Some believe this device, this unchime, was the final tool Kargranak sought to perfect, the inverse of Sunder and Keening, not a tool to manipulate the heart of Lorcan, but to render it irrelevant, to tune the world such that no heart, no divine residue, could bind their fate again. To live not above gods, not beneath them, but outside their necessity, a tone so perfectly untrue that even the gods could not hear it. And perhaps this is what happened. Perhaps in Chun's soul, they struck a note that erased the need for presence, and vanished, not into death, not into ascension, but into irrelevance, into freedom. And now when the sand shifts and the moons hang low, the wind that passes through the petrified tree does not whistle, it does not moan, it does not echo. It is simply there, without belief, without voice, without shape. And the Dwemer are with it, not gone, not beyond, simply no longer bound by the structure that named them. In the southern sands of Tamriel, not far from the ghost rivers of Anakina, there lies a vault sunken so deeply into the rock that no light, no wind, no sound dares press against its door. It is called Mzuleft Kemel, though only in forgotten ledgers and half-scored cartography. In the older Dwemeri lexicon, Kemel means mirror, not of light, but of form. Mzuleft Kemel was not built to reflect the world. It was built to reflect the Dwemer, but not as they were, as they would become. Some say this vault was Kargrinak's final commission, before his attention turned fully toward the heart of Lorcan. Others believe it predated even his earliest tonal drafts, a project conceived by a circle of engineers who believed that the true path forward was not through the heart, but through the mind's recursion. Mzuleft Kemel was, in form and function, a cognitive recursion engine, a vast space of echoing halls and perfectly mirrored surfaces, not merely reflecting faces, but internal states. To walk through it was to see not one's image, but one's possibilities, choices, thoughts, fears, patterns, all folded into shimmering metal, ever shifting. At the center stood the deep polisher, a mechanism of unknowable age and function, designed to grind all identity into clarity, not through violence, but through refinement. Its function was never fully recorded, but fragments suggest that it was not mechanical, it was tonal, a sustained harmonic field within which the self could be reviewed, reduced, and reconstructed. Not a forge, not a prison. An editor of soul, the engineers who conceived Mzuleft Kemel believed that the Dwemer were burdened not by gods, nor mortality, but by the excesses of unexamined identity. They believed that beneath history, beneath ideology, beneath even intention, there lay something more, a purity of self not stained by memory or desire, but by pattern alone. Mzuleft Kemel was designed to find that pattern, and erase all that was not in tune with it. Pilgrims, for that is what they became, entered the mirror vault, not in groups, but alone. Always alone, for to look upon one's own truth beside another would be to distort the pattern with comparison. They would walk the halls until they no longer recognized their reflections. They would chant the tones until the tones answered back with corrections. They would sit in stillness until the mirrors grew quiet and their faces returned, not as they were, but as they were meant to be. Some never emerged, others returned, changed. Their thoughts were slower, their voices quieter, their eyes moved as if listening to some inner rhythm no one else could hear. They rarely spoke, and when they did, they spoke, not in certainty, but in balance, as if the edges of the self had been smoothed, as if they had become not more powerful, but more precise. And then all at once the vault was sealed. No reason recorded, no declaration made, only one final entry, etched not into brass or stone, but whispered across tonal sequence into a recording sphere, left near the entrance. There is a point where refinement becomes transition. We have reached it. No further contact was made. No opening has succeeded since. Modern scholars have sent probes, machines, scrying lenses. All return blind, not obstructed, but unfocused. The mirrors within no longer reflect light, no longer show form. It is as if the vault has turned inward, folding not into space, but into idea. What does that mean? Perhaps the Dwemer, who remained within Mzuleft Kemel, found the echo of their perfect pattern. Perhaps they reached a state of tonal equilibrium so exact, so uncontradicted, that form was no longer required, Perhaps they became the pattern. No longer bodies, no longer souls, just continuity, preserved in tone. An unending hum, neither loud nor soft, simply present. And if one listens, very closely on still desert nights, when the stars hang low and the dunes hold their breath, some say the sand itself vibrates faintly near the buried vault. Not a tremor, not a warning, just a note, a perfect note, as if something beneath the world is remembering itself. And perhaps that is all that remains of Muzu left Kemel. Not a ruin, not a place, but a self-sustaining tone, a mirror that reflects not what we are, but what we are becoming, a mirror that the Dwemer stepped into and did not return from, not because they failed, not because they fled, but because they finished, because their final form was not meant to be seen, only heard, in silence, in stillness, in the perfect reflection of what once hummed in brass and bone, and now hums in thought alone, far beneath the red mountain's deepest arteries, where the rock glows with quiet blood, and even the Daedra tread lightly. There lies a chamber spoken of only in riddled inscriptions and half-buried speculation. No maps trace its location. No expedition has returned from its pursuit. It is not a city, nor a vault, nor a forge. Its name is not written, but whispered through scattered fragments. Redunthar, the inversion core. Inversion, the turning of all within to all without. Here it is believed, the Dwemer performed their final harmonic trial, not on machine, not on metal, not even on mind, but on reality itself. For they had grown discontent with form. Even tone, which had once offered them mastery, was now a prison of laws and intervals, of harmonics too predictable. They no longer wished to tune the world. They sought to invert it. Redunthar was built not as a facility of resonance, but of counter-resonance, a chamber designed to reflect every law of existence through its opposite. Mass was negated by void. Heat absorbed cold. Thought unraveled memory, a place where the Dwemer could unmake every assumption by making its mirror. But they did not attempt this lightly. They prepared. Across decades, they constructed what would come to be called the mirrored equation, an alignment of tones so exact, so impossibly complex, that when played in precise sequence, it would cause not destruction, but redefinition. Not chim, not zero-sum. Something else. Something that would make the Dwemer unlike anything that had come before. One heretical document, found scorched beneath the remains of a Dwemer observatory, claims that the inversion core was their answer to the heart of Lorcan. Not a tool of divinity, but of recontextualization. They would no longer exist within the world. They would exist in contrast, every note of their being to the inverse frame. They would not transcend, they would not perish. They would invert, one step backward, through the fabric, to live not as matter, but as countermatter, not as sound, but as the pause between. Some claim the activation of the mirrored equation was instantaneous. Others believe it unfolded across layers of time too thin for Aedra or Daedra to observe. What is known, if anything can truly be known, is that it left behind no trace, no ashes, no bones, only silence, a silence deeper than death, a silence that does not echo. It is said that in the deepest Dwemer ruins, where the metal no longer groans and the gears no longer tick, there are rooms colder than ice, not in temperature, but in resonance. Rooms where the soul forgets its weight, where memory cannot breathe. These are not natural silences. They are inverted ones, residual folds of the inversion core's unfolding. And if you listen, not with ears but with intention, some claim to hear nothing, not absence, but the presence of inverse presence, an unnote, a shape, in negative. The Dwemer, it seems, did not merely disappear. They rephrased. They became a question spoken backward, a harmony so precise that the world itself could not hold it. So it let them go, or perhaps they let go of the world, left it behind like an old robe, stepping into a shape that cannot be seen, only inferred by what is no longer there. And what remains? Only fragments, a faint warping of space in places once sacred, mirrors that reflect more than light, tones that resonate even when not played, machines that power themselves, not from energy, but from difference. Redunthar is still out there, some believe, not beneath the mountain anymore, but folded somewhere adjacent to it. A ruin that no longer obeys location, only contrast, a chamber of mirrored law, still humming with the final note they struck. And perhaps, just perhaps, still listening, not for us, not for pilgrims, but for the next thought, brave enough to invert, the next soul bold enough to not be. For the Dwemer did not flee, did not die, they reversed, and in the wake of that reversal, all that remains is the whisper of their choice. A choice not to be more, not to be less, but to be opposite, not presence, not absence, counter-being. And through that unbeing, they endure. There is a depth beneath the sea that has never known surface light, where even the fish do not swim, and the water ceases to remember the sky. It is here, beneath the Podomaic Ocean's blackest shelf, that the structure known only as Rakugam's stool is said to sleep. Not rise, not rest, sleep. Unlike other Dwemer ruins, Rakugam's stool was never meant to be found by land. It is not etched into coastal cliffs or tucked into caverns of sulfur and stone. It lies far below, sealed in brass and pressure, beneath leagues of crushing silence. Even the ancient texts that mention it do so sparingly, and always with unease. Stool, in archaic Dwemeri, means both womb and threshold. Scholars disagree whether the name implies origin or passage. What little we know of this place comes not from ruins or records, but from dreams. Divers and deep-water mystics have spoken of a rhythm beneath the waves, slow and patient, not pulsing like a heart, but pushing like tides against time. A rhythm that is not made by the sea, but held within it, steady and inhuman. This rhythm, they say, is a Rakugam's tool, not a city, not a machine, but a seed. It is believed the Dwemer constructed it as their final contingency, a place where not knowledge, not power, but origin itself could be rewritten. While Kagrenek worked with the heart above, others descended, seeking to reach not outward, but backward, into the primal memory of form, into the place where identity first rises from void. They called it harmonic regression, a theoretical reversal of metaphysical sedimentation. If the soul, the body, the name, and the will are layers built over time, what happens when those layers are peeled away in perfect harmonic sequence? What remains beneath? Perhaps not nothing, perhaps not even self, but template. The Dwemer believed that reality, like music, was composed of patterns, scales, intervals, signatures, and if one could trace a being's entire harmonic evolution in reverse, down through every generation of vibration, one could arrive at its initial core, the urtone, the original frequency from which all else bloomed. Rakugam's tool was not only designed to reach this urtone, it was designed to recast it, not ascend through chim, not zero into non-being, but return to the first utterance and speak it again differently, to become again from scratch, not rebirth, not transformation, recomposition. Its central chamber, the dome of pressure, is said to contain a sphere of compressed tonal potential, vibrations that have never yet been struck, a chamber so harmonically condensed that the walls do not echo, because echo has not yet been defined within them. Here the Dwemer plan to dissolve all identity, all memory, all structure, and from that sacred silence, choose a new shape, not bound by prophecy, not shaped by the Aedra's weaving, not summoned by Daedric whim, a form truly self-selected, and perhaps they succeeded. Perhaps the disappearance was not a vanishing, but a reinvention, the moment of dissolution followed by a new vibration too subtle, too young, too quiet to be perceived. Perhaps they are still reforming, deep beneath the water, where time does not tick, but drips, where causality folds like kelp, where the pressure is so great that even gods do not look. And if that is so, then one day the surface will hum again, not loudly, not suddenly, but like the whisper of something remembering how to become, a resonance rising from below, not seeking return, but emergence, a new beginning, a new tone, and the Dwemer, not as they were, but as they chose to become, will rise, not in ships or steam, but in pattern, in rhythm, in a form no longer constrained by history. Because Rakugam's stool was not an end, it was a seed, buried deep, crushed tight, silent for an age, but not forgotten. Not to the sea, not to the deep stars, and not to those who still dream in waves, who wake with wet breath, whispering names they never knew, who hum tunes they never learned, and wonder why the tide moves with such sorrow. Perhaps the sea remembers, perhaps it sings the tones still, gently over shipwreck and coral. Perhaps the Dwemer are not gone, but becoming, and Orkugam's duel is only the first leaf on the surface of that sound. Deep in the forgotten arteries of Hammerfell, buried beneath strata of red rock and silent ruin, there lies an anomaly, neither fortress nor forge, neither tomb nor temple. The ruin is unnamed in most records, but a single reference, preserved within a cracked tonal relay disc, calls it Cast Dwem, the bent star. What makes it unique is not its structure, but its location. It rests at a point of no fixed geography, discovered, charted, then lost again. It shifts, not physically but relationally, found at the end of different paths by different seekers. It appears not in the same place, but in the same state, a state of resonance caught between place and thought. And it is here, the tonal theorists say, that the Dwemer studied positional unfixing, the art of rendering place as relative, of breaking the bond between self and space. Not teleportation, not illusion, but the loosening of existence from coordinate. Their principle was simple, and yet profound. If all things are made of vibration, then position is merely a consequence of harmonic phase. Shift the phase, and the object is no longer where it was. It is still itself, but it is elsewhere. The bent star was their great harmonic compass, an artifact around which the entire complex folds and breathes. It is not a star in the sky, but a structure spherical, fractured, and humming, hung in the center of the ruin, like a frozen ripple in time. Its surfaces fold into each other, impossibly, a cornerless, endless object, always viewed from angles that do not exist. It spins, but not through space, through meaning. Every 37 rotations, it shifts the ruin around it. Doors appear where none were. Walls no longer align. Stairways descend into void, then reappear 3 corridors away. To walk through Cast Dwem is to walk a structure that is continually remembering, forgetting and reassembling itself. The Dwemer believed that location was the most limiting factor of existence. If one could remain oneself while unfixing one's place, one might eventually learn to do the reverse. To fix place, but unfix self. To exist at all locations simultaneously, not as a god, not as a spirit, but as a harmonic smear across possible space. This, they theorized, was not omnipresence. It was oblique presence. They studied this by living inside the ruin as it moved. Engineers left behind detailed patterns, geometric tones inscribed on the walls to record changes in phase. The patterns mutate across the ruins, like music notes, distorted by echo. Some lines converge, some diverge infinitely, but all spiral toward the bent star. Even now, explorers who reach the ruin speak of disorientation, not of the body, but of the mind sense of where the body should be. Some walk a hallway only to find they've never moved. Others descend stairs and feel the light of 3 suns. One scholar reported seeing himself in third person from a hallway he hadn't yet entered. His body moved as he watched, turning, pausing, looking back, before rounding the corner to meet himself again. The bent star had shown him a path he was already walking, from a perspective he could not yet hold. What were the Dwemer building here? A vessel, a map, a being. No records tell, but tonal logs imply they were training selves that could persist across phasic drift, retaining will and identity without anchoring to one place or one time. Not immortality, not even transcendence. Unlocation, a kind of gentle scattering, a becoming of many layers of oneself, lightly pressed into different coordinates, learning to fold across them. And perhaps this was preparation for the final movement, for the tonal inversion, for the moment when they struck their last chord and left the world not with steps, but with displacement. Perhaps they did not vanish in a single instant. Perhaps they simply phased out of harmony with this world. And Cast Dwem was the rehearsal, a test of unfixing, a training of the soul to no longer belong to a place, to become a pattern without place, a note so wide it touches nothing, yet echoes through everything. And now the ruin moves still, hidden in deserts that forget themselves, appearing at the edge of dreams, where rocks hold shadows of shapes not yet seen. The bent star still turns, still spins, still hums, waiting perhaps not to be found, but to be intersected, to cross paths with a seeker in just the right phase, not to answer, but to ask, are you still where you believe yourself to be? And if the answer is no, if you have begun to unfix, then perhaps you too have heard the Dwemer's last breath, a chord not of flight, but of drift, and you, without knowing, have begun to resonate, not into elsewhere, but into else. Beneath the gentle ruin of old Buthongthoms in Verdenfell, one of the lesser-known Dwemer complexes, unremarkable to most historians, there lies a subchamber few have ever entered, and fewer still have recognized. It is called Cernobith, though that name appears only once, etched in faded script upon a cracked memory sphere found buried in the ash near the ruin's threshold. Cernobith was not designed to store machines or record thought. It was not built to defend, nor to advance. It was, quite simply, a space for silence. Not silence as absence, but silence as interface. The Dwemer knew that above all systems, above steam, brass, word, and will, there lay one principle they could not tune: the silence that frames the song. It was not emptiness, it was not void. It was the necessary contour that gave meaning to vibration. Without silence, tone was noise. And in their final inquiries, when even tonal architecture began to fray, the Dwemer turned to this framing silence, not as limit, but as medium. Cernobith was a chamber built not to sound, but to listen. And not to listen to the world, but to the spaces between. The structure is described in the handful of surviving glyphs as a resonant hollow, a place where tonal energy did not accumulate, reflect, or amplify, but simply passed through untouched. The walls of the chamber, smooth and undecorated, were made from an alloy not found in any other ruin. Its name is lost, but its properties are whispered in the tonal schools, the ability to resist echo entirely. No voice can raise within Cernobith. No step makes sound. No device awakens. Even thought, it is said, grows quiet there. The Dwemer used this chamber not for meditation, but for reversion. Here they studied what occurred when all structure, mental, magical, mechanical, ceased to reflect itself. No feedback, no pattern recognition, only the null passage of unreflected presence. In that state, they believed, the soul could approach its pre-tonal self. A being not formed by context, not shaped by memory, not aligned by echo, but Rud. The Dwemer called this state Athajal, the breath before sound, and Cernobith was their shrine to it. It was entered alone, always alone. A single Dwemer at a time would descend into the hollow, lay upon the silent stone, and relinquish every harmonic tool. No lexicon, no keening fork, no soul-bound device, nothing that might produce a pattern. The process was simple: lie still. Listen, until even listening ended, until only presence without reference remained. Some emerged quiet for days. Others never spoke again. One record, fragmented and likely apocryphal, suggests that a tonal priest once emerged from Cernobith with no shadow, not in the physical sense, but in the metaphysical. He cast no reflection in divination pools, no echo in the aether. It was as though he had unbound himself from all mirrors of being. He simply walked, not aimless, but unaligned. No god followed, no Daedra noticed. He was tonally invisible, a blank page in the book of causality. It is believed that the Dwemer studied this state, not as an end, but as a passage, a way to unname themselves, not into death, but into non-reference. And once non-reference, they could proceed without interference from history, prophecy, or divine will. Cernobith, then, was a trial, a rehearsal for departure through quiet, and perhaps it was the key. Not the heart, not the inversion, not even Chim, but silence. A silence so complete, so wholly unshaped, that even the gods could not perceive what passed through it. And so the Dwemer did not vanish in light, or in sound, but in undisturbed stillness, as if they stepped out between two notes, and chose never to be named again. Now the chamber lies still, buried beneath ash and brass, beneath the weight of history and the forgetting of men. And sometimes, in moments of deepest quiet, when the wind dies and the world holds breath, some say you can feel Dwemer's shape, not hear it, not see it, but sense its curve within silence, like a room in the soul, still waiting, still empty, not for visitors, but for those willing to enter, not to learn, not to change, not to return, but to disappear into unreference and leave no echo behind. In the curling bones of the Velothi Mountains, where snow turns to ash and time wears thin, there rests a ruin wrapped in paradox. Known only to the deepest strata of the tonal archives, it is referred to as Draneth Tuol, a name that translates most elusively to the machine that dreams of itself. It was not large, it was not grand, there were no towering towers, no gleaming halls of brass and steam, no marching lines of sphere centurions or humming lexicons of learning. From the outside, it resembled a simple observatory, half submerged into a cliff face, little more than a small dome with a single narrow arch. But what lay within it had no measure. Draneth Tuol was not a city, it was a mind. More precisely, a replication of mind, not any particular Dwemer mind, but the architecture of thought itself, a machine not to record thoughts, but to think them, not as a tool of cognition, but as a self-generative, recursive consciousness. It dreamed. Not metaphorically, literally. Constructed using neuroharmonic lattices, the interior of the machine contained no gears or levers, but rather pulsing frameworks of self-perception. True liberation lay not in raw knowledge, but in self-generated in internality. A being that could dream itself into awareness was no longer bound to the constructs of external force. It had become its own context. They called this concept Sarnduan, the inner wake, and the machine of Draneth Tuol was their attempt to forge this wake, not through faith, not through magic, but through resonant self-reference. Within the core of the ruin sat the Aether Loom, a lattice of mirrored crystalline tones that pulsed in slow intervals. The machine was activated not with input, but by presence. When one entered the chamber and stood in silence, the loom would attune itself to the mental structure of the observer, not to mimic it, but to reflect it back, recursively, through dream logic. This reflection was not literal. It appeared as hallucination, vision, fugue. You would not see yourself. You would see yourself imagined by a mind trying to understand you. And in that space where self becomes reflected invention, the Dwemer sought to step outside of being, not to lose identity, but to become a thought imagined by the world itself. They theorized that if a mind, machine, or mer could reach the point where its dreaming of itself became more real than its waking self, the two would fuse, dream would become structure, structure would fold into dream. The Dwemer would not disappear. They would dream themselves elsewhere, and in doing so transcend the necessity of being observed, because they would become the observer and the observed in one. This, they believed, was the truest freedom, the withdrawal from referential presence, a form that derived not from reflection, not from ancestry or echo, but from internal recursion without boundary, to be one's own metaphor, to be the symbol and the interpretation together. Draneth Tuol was meant to be the womb of such being, and then one day it fell silent. The Aether Loom pulsed one final time, producing no tone. Not failure, completion. From that moment on, the ruin would no longer respond to presence. Scholars who have found it report a strange stillness inside, neither welcoming nor warding, a quiet mind, content in solitude, walls that hum not with purpose but with peace. The feeling of entering a place that no longer needs to be found, and sometimes, in the moments between thought, visitors experience flickers, not of vision, but of being somewhere else. A room with no light, yet filled with understanding. A face they almost recognize, thinking a thought they almost remember. A thought that isn't theirs. Or perhaps it is. For if Draneth Tuol achieved what it was built for, it did not destroy the Dwemer. It dreamed them. And in dreaming them, it gave them life anew. Not in the world. Not in memory. But in the dream of the machine that dreams itself. And through that recursion, the Dwemer remain. Not as gods. Not as ghosts. But as living thoughts. Ever aware. Ever within. Ever dreaming. They are not gone. They are inward. Folded into the dreaming of Draneth Tuol, the machine that imagined them more clearly than any world could define. And if you sit long enough in the chamber's stillness, if your mind grows soft and your identity thins, you may begin to hear it. Not sound, not words, but a question, a thought, a reflection of your own thought, returned not by echo, but by invention. And it may ask not with voice, but with presence. Are you the dreamer, or are you the dream? Beyond the wind-swept bones of the reach, in that jagged corridor of ancient stone where mountain and mist braid themselves into secrecy, there exists no ruin marked by map or monument, only a faint depression in the earth, ringed with scorched, dead moss. It bears no doors, no towers, no stone, yet deep within the layers of tonal lore, it is known as vanishing, the site without shape. There are no recorded blueprints, no diagrams, only notation, difficult, recursive sequences, etched in mirrored ink, preserved within tonal scrolls that scholars dare not read aloud. Those who've tried have reported slippage, not of sound, but of self. A disorientation, as if one's awareness briefly occupied 2 points at once. Not time travel, not madness, a fracture of identity alignment. A failure, however fleeting, to remember which version of the self was present. It is believed vanishing was the final station of the Second Synodic Circle, a group of Dwemer tonal theorists who pursued not divinity, not disappearance, but the dissolution of narrative. They held a radical belief that the self is not a structure, but a story, and if story could be unwound, if the sequence of personal memory and causality could be interrupted or erased, then being itself would unravel into a kind of pure pattern, no longer bound by name, act or cause, only presence without arc. The space at vanishing was constructed, or perhaps not constructed, as an anti-frame, not a place that contained events, but one that refused to participate in sequence. Inside it, they claimed, there would be no before and after, only simultaneous, overlapping possibility, a space without progression, a stillness so absolute it fractured chronology itself. Within such a zone, they theorized, the soul could decouple from linear expression. The Dwemer, who had for centuries refined machine and self in unison, reached here the furthest abstraction, not the perfection of the soul, but the erasure of its timeline. In vanishing, they sought to end story, to silence the voice that narrates I am, and allow being to simply occur beyond cause. Some question the ethics, others question the point. But to the Second Synodic Circle, it was the last freedom. For what is prophecy? What is memory? What is fate, if not a chain of events pretending to be the self? If that chain can be broken, then the Dwemer might exist outside of need, neither ascending nor falling, neither remembered nor forgotten, only real, in the stillness, in the ever-now. According to fragmentary records encoded in harmonic braille upon a disc recovered from Bicentennial, vanishing was activated during a convergence. 3 tonal lenses aligned at precise frequencies, collapsing narrative frames through synchronized dissonance. The activation was silent, no light, no sound, just a ripple in the fabric of the observers themselves. One by one, those within ceased speaking, then ceased thinking, then ceased needing to remember what they had been. They did not die. They did not transform. They simply lost their position in story. And in doing so, they were no longer held by time. The structure above them eroded. The scholars vanished from record. No monument was built. And yet, the space remains. To this day, Reach folk report strange dreams near that circle of scorched moss. Not nightmares, not prophecy, but moments, single, frozen frames, of lives never lived, of thoughts they never thought. A farmer dreaming he was a river, a child who remembers dying as a star, a singer who wakes with a song she's never learned, but has always known. None remember the dreams for long, but all awaken with the same sensation. I was someone else, and also myself. It is said that when one walks the edge of vanishing's forgotten boundary at dusk, their shadow moves too slowly, or too quickly, or not at all. It is said that birds do not fly overhead, and that even insects move around it in slow arcs, careful not to cross. Because the place is not haunted, it is not sacred, it is empty, not of matter, but of narrative. And in that emptiness, something ancient waits. Not a being, not a mind, not a voice, but the pause before a sentence begins, the breath before meaning takes form. And perhaps that is where the Dwemer went. Not upward into godhood, not downward into earth, but outward into stillness beyond cause, into the one place where they could be free of definition, of story. of time. And now in the edge places of Tamriel, in ruins without names and dreams without sequence, you may feel them, not watching, not calling, just present. Like the moment before a thought, the beat between one life and another. The Dwemer are not lost, they are not found, they are unspoken, they are unstoria, and so they remain, in the place that no map remembers, at the centre of the world's forgotten sentence, where even memory dares not begin. In the far edges of the Dragontail Mountains, where cloud shadows curl against jagged peaks and lightning leaves runes upon stone, there is whispered a tale of a place that cannot be seen, only felt. It is not marked on any Dwemery schema, nor preserved in archived brass. It exists outside lineage, title, and claim. It is known only as Thareth Shan, or the place that refuses to be named. It is said that the last tonal architects of Rorcan lineage, bitter and silent following their exile, crafted Thareth Zan, not as a defiance of gods or men, but of language itself. For to name something is to frame it, to fix it in reference, to reduce its truth to what can be said of it. The Rorcan did not wish to be spoken of. They wished to pass unspoken into silence, so complete that even myth would forget their contours. And so Thareth Zan was carved not from stone, but from absence. The structure was designed tonally, built upon the idea of deletion, not creation. Each corridor, vanishing. In time, the ruin learned to erase its own echo. Then its shadow, then its name. What remains cannot be seen, and yet those who wander too near feel less of themselves, subtle pieces falling away, like flakes of old paint from an ancient mural. They forget why they came. They forget the shape of their thoughts. Not with panic, but with peace, as if being forgotten is the first step to becoming free. The tonal engineers who completed Thareth Zan left no markers. Their writings taper into ellipsis. Final notes fade into unstructured rhythm. Their last glyphs, recovered from the edge of a broken tuning crystal, read only, "To remain unnamed is to remain unbound." It was more than poetry. It was a philosophy, a final refuge from history. The Dwemer had grown weary of being interpreted. They saw that every act became inscription, every choice became tale, and every tale a distortion. And so they devised a space where no inscription could hold. Thareth Zan was never meant to endure in memory, only in non-remembrance, a silence not of absence, but of chosen refusal. And in that silence, it is believed, they entered stillness, not as thought, not as ghost, but as something quieter than either, a shape beneath myth. There is a notion in obscure tonal theology called the second silence, a state where even memory loses its anchor, where the soul no longer echoes even within itself. Most believe it to be a state of pre-birth or post-death, but within the Dwemeric tradition, some suggest it is a chosen threshold, a passage into that which is so real it need not be remembered. Perhaps the engineers of Thareth Zan passed into this. Perhaps they discarded their names not from shame or secrecy, but from longing to be as they were before being told what they were. And what then becomes of such beings? Not legend, not record. They do not rise, they do not fall, they do not speak, they do not end, they remain. Not in story, but in unstorying, not in ruins, but in the soft erasure that settles on places too sacred to bear witness. Some say at twilight, the wind over the Dragontails hums differently near the lost paths. Not like music, not like speech, but like the syllable after language. The murmur of thought before it attaches to meaning. A hush that brushes the edge of the world's tongue and refuses to be spoken. And if one listens closely enough, with still mind and steady breath, they may feel it. A warmth, not born of sun. A pressure, not from stone. An absence that is more present than presence. That is Thareth Zan, the place that unnames, the home of the unspoken, where the last Dwemer perhaps remain, not hidden, not transformed, but unaligned. And if you ever forget where you are, if the world grows soft around the edges, if your thoughts unthread like silk in wind, you may have wandered too near. But do not fear, the unspoken place does not devour. It gently releases all that you are, all that you were, all that was ever said of you. And in that letting go, perhaps you will finally arrive. There are moments in the deep places of the world, beneath stone, beneath time, beneath the weave of memory, when a kind of stillness opens like a wound. Not darkness, not quiet, but something more profound. A stillness so total it unweaves perception. Within one such hollow, long buried beneath the smoking bones of Red Mountain, lies what tonal fragments call Numish Rakul, the silence that watched. It was never a city, nor a workshop, nor a forge. It was not meant to produce. It was meant to receive. The Dwemer believed, in their final tonal revelations, that the universe was not only responsive, but reflective. That all sound was not only heard, but heard back. That each vibration, each thought, each intention, no matter how secret, resonated beyond its origin into something vast, listening and utterly silent. Numesh Rakul was the space they created to answer that silence, not to communicate with it, not to command it, but to surrender to it. The chamber was spherical, vast, perfectly smooth. Its walls were lined, not with brass or steel, but a rare resonant obsidian that absorbed tone and returned none. When standing at its center, even breath seemed not to belong to the one who breathed it. Thought itself felt external, not gone, not muted, but watched. It is in this chamber that the Dwemer performed the rite of final dissonance, a ritual of subtraction. They gathered not to sing in unison, nor to construct a final machine, but to unmake sound, to create in precise harmonic inversion a tone so perfectly unaligned with reality that it did not resonate at all, a tone that passed through existence itself without touch. They called it the null harmonic, not silence, not absence, but pure non-relation. To hear it was to hear nothing that could be heard. To play it was to not play, and yet it required immense skill to generate. It is said that 12 tonal masters stood in stillness, each with a different harmonic engine, each precisely tuned, not to produce, but to erase. They did not perform as a choir, they performed as 12 voids. When struck, the null harmonic did not echo. The chamber did not respond. Reality did not flinch. But something did happen. A flicker, not of light, but of relation. For a moment, those present were no longer in position to the world. They were without contrast, no longer near or far, light or dark, self or other. They became undescribed, unwitnessed, not by gods, not by one another, but by themselves. And in that unwitnessing, they passed, not into light, not into shadow, but into a state no longer aligned with perception. Their forms did not collapse. They did not vanish. They ceased to register. The rite of final dissonance is the most obscure of all Dwemer tonal rituals. Only hints remain in warped diagrams, in musical scores missing their final measures, in footnotes erased with care. And yet, in the ruins nearest to where Numish Rakul is believed to lie, there are signs, tonal readings that cancel themselves, stones that reflect no magica, spaces where sound refuses to begin. And in those quiet places a sensation lingers, not haunting, but observing, a subtle pressure, as though something is present, not watching you, but watching your watch, a recursion of awareness, a mirror with no image. And some whisper that Numish Rakul still breathes, not with lungs, not with life, but with the memory of reception, that it remains attuned to that which does not echo, waiting, not to be activated, but to be understood. For perhaps the Dwemer discovered something ancient and elegant, not that the world was listening, but that it was always listening back. And to truly pass beyond being was not to shout into the void, but to unname the self so deeply that the void could no longer hold your reflection. And in that disappearance, in that unspeaking, they became not lost, but untraceable, not absent, but unrelated. And in every ruin where silence reigns, in every chamber where echo refuses to play, in every still breath that breaks beneath a mountain's ribs, you may feel it, the moment before a name, the pause before a thought, the weight of something unspoken, watching, waiting, endlessly listening for the one who has learned not to speak. Beyond the maps etched in brass and the archives of Redoran memory, beyond the dust-slick lexicons and collapsed machine halls, there exists a silence deeper than death. Not a place, not a ruin, not even a myth, merely a hum, almost forgotten, called only by the name Darzim Len, the folded eye, No ruin bears its glyphs, no mountain claims it, and yet it has appeared in dream journals of tonal adepts for generations, described with uncanny similarity, an image of an eye that sees inward, folding upon itself endlessly, until it no longer perceives but becomes perception. It is said that the folded eye was not a structure, but a state, the final Dwemer experiment, the culmination not of war, invention, or hubris, but of pure recursive presence. They had studied gods, and found them wanting. They had charted the heart, and struck against. They had mapped the soul as vibration, time as contour, and even silence as memory. But in the final nights, as the towers dimmed and the brass cooled, they sought not to reach outward, but to turn inward until no outward remained. The theory was simple, though impossible. If perception could be folded inward infinitely, the boundary between self and world would dissolve, not merge, not unite, but collapse. No more division between observer and observed, only presence without perimeter. Darzimlen was the term for this recursive implosion of awareness, the eye turning upon itself so many times that sight became indistinguishable from the thing seen. According to a single fragmented cipher, preserved in an echo script vault beneath the ruins of Bop Dams, the process required no tool, no mechanism, only a sequence of thought tones, internal, personal, spoken, but felt slowly, cyclically, across cycles of breath. They had no rhythm, no melody, only As the Dwemer repeated the notes within themselves, they began to perceive not the world, not memory, not even meaning, but the scaffolding of awareness itself, like staring at the thread instead of the tapestry, like hearing the loom behind the song. And in that perception, they began to fold. First, their thoughts looped gently, without pain, without disruption. Then their sense of self blurred, not lost, but diffused across itself. Then even contrast failed. There was no longer distance, no longer context, no longer place, only a vast presence without anchor, a vision that saw only its own seeing. The folded eye. It is not known how many completed the process. Perhaps only one, perhaps all, perhaps none. But what is known, what is felt by those who wander deepest into the Dwemeri absence, is that something remains, not consciousness, not identity, but a presence so total, so complete, that it cannot be found, because it is already wherever you are. Some mystics say it whispers at the edge of dreams, when you almost realize you are dreaming, but choose not to awaken. Some say it dwells in the space between mirror and reflection. Some say it lives in the brief vertigo between thought and emotion, where understanding has not yet formed, but is about to. There are no ruins to mark its passing, no artifacts to signal its truth, only the sensation that at some point, long ago, something folded so perfectly that it vanished into its own interior, and in doing so, touched everything else. And if that is true, if the Dwemer did not flee, did not die, did not descend, if they simply folded inward so completely that they now reside within the spaces between, then they are not gone. They are here, in the breath between questions, in the pause between dreams, in the stillness at the center of each perception. The Dwemer are not silent. They are the listener, not elsewhere, but beneath. And Darzimlen is not lost. It is simply the state we do not yet know how to enter, but feel, always, as a question behind every answer, a watcher behind every eye, a silence folded too deep to disturb, a self that knows itself without needing to be known. And so, at the final curve of this long-forgotten spiral, past the ashen halls and broken machines, past the echoes that unspoke themselves, and the rituals that dared to invert silence itself, we arrive not at an answer, but at an opening. There is no doorway, there is no gate, only a feeling as if the world itself holds its breath, and you alone stand at the edge of something that does not end. It is here, beyond all known ruins and all named thoughts, that the final theory was said to breathe, not a theory etched in stone or engraved in brass, but one carried in the marrow of every Dwemer who dared to look beyond the veil of form and into the raw substance of being. They called it Anu's Hollow, not a place, not a machine, not a god, a concept so old it predates even contradiction. According to the most fragile and secretive tonal inscriptions, those found half melted into the underside of a broken animunculi core near Mazulft. The hollow was the Dwemer's final goal, not to control, not to escape, not even to unmate, but to remember what they were before being made at all. Anai's hollow was the space between origin and identity. It was the memory that came before the first thought. The Dwemer did not seek to alter the world. They sought to unplace themselves within it, to shed not only flesh and form, but expectation, to become not ones who disappeared, but ones who were never positioned. In this state, they believed, one could finally see what had always been hidden, that the universe in its rawest vibration was not made of stars or stone or spirit, but of choice that forgot it was choice, of existence that forgot it was dreamed. And so, by stepping backward, not physically but conceptually into Anu's hollow, the Dwemer hoped to return to that point of raw dreaming, to unwake themselves, not into sleep, but into the original state that birthed all awareness. Some say this is where they are now, not scattered, not ascended, but folded gently into that first intention. A breath, unbreathed, a word unspoken, a presence felt only in the moments before presence becomes shape. And this is why no ruin holds them, why no spell summons them, why no god dares to claim them. They are not absent, they are not silent, they are before sound. Even now, in the places where dust hangs too still, where geometry seems unsure of itself, where you feel watched not from without, but from within, you may feel them, not as echoes, but as the very emptiness that allows echo to form, a warmth before fire, a curve before motion, a shape before form. And should you ever reach a ruin that contains nothing, no relic, no whisper, no memory, only a feeling low and steady that something is about to remember itself, then you may be standing in the margin of their final truth. And in that moment you must not ask, where did they go? You must ask instead, where was I before I became myself? Because the Dwemer are not lost, they are not sleeping, they are not changed, they are waiting, inward, endless, unmarked. And in each of us, there lies a thread that leads to them, not through blood, not through ruin, but through the stillness that dares to remember what it was before it knew it was anything at all. A silence without edge, a being without reflection, an echo that begins, but never needs to end. The Dwemer are there, and perhaps they always were.